Sup, my fellas, don't forget to leave feedback and enjoy the story. The people who had just been going about their business were forced to stop and look at the sky, which had turned red. A huge eye blocked their ability to see anything else. The monster opened its huge mouth, preparing to spew fire, because at that moment, a catastrophe descended upon humanity through a rift in the sky. The world was overrun by monsters and peace was ended. Because of the monsters, cities began to turn into ruins. Many children lost their parents and learned to survive on their own. Then despair consumed the people. One day, one of the monsters attacked a brother and sister who were hugging each other. They thought it was the end, until the space was stained with blood. They, crying and scared, managed to find the strength to look at what was happening, because it was not the end of the world at all. The children were saved by a hunter, a man with unusual abilities. Hunters became the hope of humanity. Their abilities were considered a power that was passed on to people. The man drew a diagram on the board with chalk, saying that in other words, these are characteristics, and all thanks to them. Suddenly, the old man began to curse the blessing that caused everything to happen these days. His fist slammed into the wooden floor as the man began to shout that there were no normal hunters left. The little boy in front of him listened with his mouth open as he said that the hunters of today were useless because they showed off their characteristics and then died. Yusung, who was 5 years old at the time of the incident, was listening with rapture to his teacher's every word. Suddenly, the man asked what hunters needed to survive. The boy raised his hand and asked, "Strength and that." The man clenched his fist, saying that it was true because physical strength was the only thing worth relying on, and since he was a hunter, he should be able to defeat his opponent with one blow. He pointed at the boy and said that was why he chose him. The man believed that courage was the most important thing for a hunter. He remembered how he took Yusung. Then he thought that only those who carry the burden of fears and scars can become strong fighters. The man created a sphere in his hand and demanded that the boy trust him. The sphere turned into a Yusung figurine when the man said that he trained differently from the others because if you tirelessly train your body, you will be overflowing with mana. However, his face immediately darkened because there was one problem. The man immediately changed the living figurine of the boy into a dead one and said that if he does not endure, he will see his end, and Yusung immediately asked if he will die. The man burst out laughing and promised that this will not happen if he trains. He immediately resurrected the figurine. The man promised that Yusung will become the best, and the boy looked at the teacher with delight because the teacher said that Yusung will be an invincible hunter who has both great magic and unshakable strength. The man placed his hand on the boy's shoulder. Yusung looked at the teacher carefully, waiting for further instructions. The man pointed at himself and said that if Yusung did not believe in himself, then he should believe in him, the strongest hunter and fist king of Wanha. Yusung looked at his teacher with delight when he heard the question of whether he believed in his teacher. He picked up the child in his arms when he said that he believed, and then laughed and said that he was not mistaken about the student. It was their first day of training, but on the 711th day of training, Yusung was already able to defeat a boar. He was 7 years old when he stood over his defeated opponent, covered in his blood and breathing heavily. Woa came up from behind, holding his basin at the ready and clicking his tongue in displeasure. He sternly said that his rival, the god of the sword, was able to defeat second-rank monsters at the age of 7. He put down the basin with medicine, angrily asking why Yusung was acting like a child if he was capable of more. Wanha sat down next to the student, telling the boy that he needed to train harder, then offered dinner to those he had caught. On the 1040th day of training, Yusung was able to cut a tree with his bare hands. He was 8 years old then, and he turned to his teacher to happily report that he had succeeded. However, Wanha was dissatisfied this time too. He propped his head up with his hand and said that it was boring. On the 1785th day of training, Yusung had to fight a huge praying mantis. Then the boy used the fighting god style. The entire space was covered in clouds of dust. Yusung used a wild dragon strike that pierced the rocks, causing power to flow in a huge stream. He was 10 years old then. Yusung realized that Wanha was dissatisfied this time too. He dragged the monster with one hand, scolding the student that his stance was not good enough yet, and at this rate the boy would not become a good hunter, so Yusung said that his teacher was right. He smiled and said that he still had a lot of training to do, to which Wanha replied that they would take a break there and asked the boy to make a fire. On the day of training in 2892, Yusung was 13 years old. The teacher looked at him with anticipation. That day, Wanha decided that they should train in person. The man lifted himself off the ground in an instant. This greatly tensed the boy. Space and time around Yusung seemed to freeze, and he noticed a fist heading for his face. He managed to cover himself with his fists. Wanha laughed when the shockwave sent the student flying backwards and crashed into a rock. However, Yusung managed to stay on his feet. He abruptly darted forward, not giving his teacher a chance to recover. Wanha raised his fist again to strike. Yusung again became faster than the wind for a moment. He instantly found himself behind the teacher, who at that moment threw his fist into empty space. The boy's eyes began to glow. Wonha noticed a movement behind him. Yusung punched his teacher, but the teacher managed to turn around and defend himself. Yusung, who was sure that he would succeed a moment ago, was taken aback. He perked up when he saw how the teacher had stopped his blow. Wonha laughed again, because he was holding the child's fist with only one finger. The man praised the student, saying that he was learning quickly. He extended his hand towards the boy. Yusung felt his teacher's large palm rest on his head and gently ruffle his hair. Finally, Wonha said that it was a good job, because his stance was already much better. However, the teacher's expression changed to stern again when he told the boy not to get cocky. Yusung heard that there were many hunters equal to Wonha among them, so he should never relax. The boy realized that if he went down the mountain, he would encounter monsters like the teacher. His hand began to tremble traitorously from fear. However, he immediately pulled himself together and clenched his fist. The boy decided that he would become the best hunter. He fell silent, thinking about one important thought. Finally, Yusung looked at the teacher and promised that he would try his best. Wonha ruffled his hair again and asked him contentedly if the student wanted to become the best, and then offered him meat. It was as if the heavens echoed them that day. Yusung trained every day, and every day he came to the waterfall to relax after training. Even on the 4,421st day, Yusung meditated under the streams of pouring water. He heard the footsteps of his teacher approaching him. Finally, the footsteps faded away. Wonha said that he was sorry that this was their last day. Yusung leaned against a rock, standing up. He was wearing only a loincloth, letting the drops roll down his body. Yusung looked at the teacher sadly. At the age of 17, he was about to leave his teacher. He began to dress in silence. Then, without making a sound, he tied his hair into a ponytail. He bandaged his hands. Wonha came up and said that everything was ready. He threw something to the student, demanding that he catch it. Yusung immediately grabbed the object in midair. It turned out to be a watch. It immediately began to glow. System windows began to appear in the air in front of Yusung. The name of the Gaon Academy hung above his information. Wonha, crossing his arms over his chest, he explained that he had already sent a letter of recommendation, because in 12 years the boy would come down from the mountain. Yusung bowed and thanked the teacher for everything. They stood opposite each other, remembering this important moment for the rest of their lives. Yusung walked down the steps. He still had a lot of cherry blossoms to walk past. He remembered how the teacher told him that the world was full of hunters. He told him about the arena where hunters fought each other. Their faces are always on the screens because they make a show out of it. Wonha said that Yusung would meet them, those who are eager to fight. At such moments, the surrounding reality seems to freeze. The image of a man was displayed better. He was sitting on a tree. Yusung thought about the huge clock tower and how the teacher said that he would gain experience. Because there were many students in that academy, perhaps he would make friends with someone, but he would be the best. Wonha looked down, barely holding back his emotions. He muttered after the student that he was raised by him, the strongest hunter. Yusung himself was looking forward to a new stage of training. After what happened, humanity focused on education. Institutes were established to train the strongest hunters. The academy taught weapon handling. Students studied monsters. Yusung, like everyone else, had to learn strategies for passing dungeons. Students also studied characteristics. Yusung looked at the academy, holding his hand in front of his eyes to shield them from the sun. During his training at the academy, a student learns everything a hunter needs to know, and of course, Gaon Academy is considered the best. Yusung looked at the building happily. He was standing in front of Gaon Academy, which was bathed in sunlight. A stranger came out to meet him. He had a distinctive badge on his jacket. The man greeted Yusung and introduced himself as Principal Byung-chul. He shook the guy's hand and said with a laugh that he was glad to meet you, to which Yusung thought that the man was quite kind. They went up to the principal's office, and Byung-chul invited Yusung to sit down, saying that they did not know each other at all, so he offered a cup of tea. They were sitting opposite each other when Byung-chul asked if Yusung wanted to attend Gaon Academy. The man was pleased that Wonha's student had come, even though he looked strange. Bisal hoped that the boy had incredible abilities. The director decided to ask a question that seemed obvious to him, but he still wanted to know if Yusung was an S rank. The boy was a little embarrassed because he was an F rank. The director laughed awkwardly, so his hopes were immediately dashed. Byung-chul thought that the boy in front of him was funny because Wonha couldn't have an F-rank student. He nervously ran his hand through his hair, asking with the hope that maybe Yusung was at least in a rank. However, the boy denied this assumption as well, since he had already said that his characteristics were F-rank. The director immediately called up the system window, where the guy's rank was listed under the letter F. The characteristic was increased concentration. The effect was an increase in concentration depending on the amount of mana used. Byung-chul could not hold back and shouted that this was impossible, that the guy really was an F rank. Yusung smiled disarmingly and said that the teacher told him not to rely on the characteristics. However, the director's disappointment was already unstoppable. He got up from his chair and turned his back to the guy to somehow calm his emotions. The man thought that Manhwa would help him. Byung Chul leaned on the windowsill, exhaling loudly. Without turning around, he said that he did not intend to take F-rank fighters to the academy. However, he could not go back on his promise, and so he called up the system and began to do something with it. The director decided to warn Yusung in advance, after which he continued clicking on the icons. He turned around, closed the system window, and said that it was very difficult at Gaon Academy. He narrowed his eyes, then explained that if Yusung wanted to study here, he would have to show what he was capable of. Yusung listened carefully. This also applies to F ranks. The guy listened to this news calmly. The school system reported that all the students received an official document about the entrance exam where the opponent would be Yusung. The only details known were that they were currently looking for an opponent, and to test the condition, you need to have an SD rank and a place in the ranking up to 1065th. The students immediately began to read the message. They looked through the details of the case. The guys discussed among themselves that 50 points would be given for an F-rank victory, but the opponent was a disciple of the Fist King, so they were a little scared. Suddenly, someone asked him to repeat what he had just said. One of the students asked in surprise whether the F-rank student was a disciple of the Fist King and whether 50 points would be given for defeating him, to which he was confirmed. Hajin, a first-year student, a D ranker and ranked 42nd, smirked. He squeezed his classmate's shoulder. Hajin asked if there was a catch to this because his intuition told him that this was some kind of trick. However, his classmate doubted it. Hajin let the boy go and asked him to tell the others that he would handle this matter. Then, Hajin turned around and said that if anyone was against it, let them say so, then they could fight him themselves. The boy left the classroom, to which the others only said goodbye to him. The boy muttered as he watched Hajin leave that this was not very good. Hajin himself was jubilant that he would easily get 50 points for winning, and maybe it would happen that the Fist King would take him as a disciple. He was incredibly happy about this. Suddenly, he bumped into someone. He rudely asked where the student was going, then turned around. His face took on a surprised expression. The girl he collided with remained silent at this outburst. It turned out to be Adela Hortensia, and her place in the rankings was number 1. Hajin realized that it was Adela and that he had better run. The girl muttered the name of the Fist King. She remembered how the girl told her when she was little that his comrade was the best hunter, and next to him, nothing seemed scary. Then, while braiding her hair, the man told her that even he, who considered himself a genius, instantly lost to him, so he asked his granddaughter to remember the name of the best hunter in history and her grandfather's comrade. Then he said the name of the Fist King Wanha. Adela was surprised that his student had come to the academy. She looked down, deep in thought. She thought that if this was true, then he should succeed. Some time later, in the waiting room, Yusung looked great in his new school uniform. The classmate standing next to him said that the uniform fits perfectly. Then he asked if the size was right, to which Yusung thanked the guy because everything was fine. The classmate said that it was nothing to him because he had a keen eye, and Sue was a first year with the 72nd place in the rankings. Yusung began to move his arms, happy that the uniform did not restrict his movements at all, to which Sue replied that the most important thing for a hunter was comfort. He said that there was only one detail left and clicked on Yusung's watch. A barrier immediately appeared around them, which was installed just in case, and also the barrier provided safety so they could fight without worrying. Sue wondered in surprise whether Yusung would really fight Hajin, because it was a bit difficult for the entrance exam, so he thought it was better not to hype things up before the test began. A girl appeared from behind the door, shouting that time was up. Stu slapped Yusung on the back and wished her luck in winning. Yusung thought that it was time for the entrance exam to the academy that even his teacher respected, so he clenched his fist and promised himself that he would definitely pass. The spotlights were shining in the competition hall, and the events were being shown on TVs. The host pulled the microphone towards her and began to say that this was Yusung's report for Channel K, and she was there to introduce Yusung since this guy had attracted public attention by becoming a disciple of the Fist King. And at that moment, the principal who was sitting next to her thought that the girl was so noisy, and if it weren't for the sponsorship, he wouldn't tolerate it. Meanwhile, Yusung loudly invited the audience to meet the guy. She introduced Yusung as a mysterious student. She introduced Hajin as a guy ranked 42nd in the rankings and a locomotive that went off the rails. Hajin heard Yusung's voice saying that, probably. It was hard to accept a fight that had so much riding on it, so she wanted to know if Hajin would tell her how he dared to do it. The guy hesitated at first, then began to smile. He pathetically stated that he agreed that a lot was riding on this fight, but he was a student of Gaon Academy, an educational institution with a rich history and a solid reputation. The audience began to fall asleep to his long speech about how they were curious to try it, whether this applicant was worthy of the honor of studying at their academy. The screens showed Hanjin's satisfied face, who was saying that he would show them a fight. The girl with glasses asked the guy with a cheerful smile what he was talking about. He had accepted the challenge for experience points and nothing more. Besides, he had only recently been in 40th place in the rankings, so she was curious how he would win. Hajin raised his fist up, promising not to disgrace the academy. The guy looked like he was excited with anticipation. Yuhana said that Hajin had high aspirations, then thanked him for his answer. The host turned to Yusung, asking him to say a few words about what he expected from today's match. The boy closed his eyes, gathering his courage. He resolutely said that he would do his best, to which Hana laughed, saying that he was speaking briefly and succinctly. Hajin smirked and called the boy a loser. Yusung decided not to respond to this, so Yuhana announced the start of the countdown to the match. Hajin leaned forward and said that F rank. I should know their place, so he would deal with the opponent in a second. He clenched his fists, thinking that as soon as the fight began, he would use his ability. The signal for the start sounded. Hajin only had time to blink before his opponent disappeared from his sight. He could only sigh in surprise when Yusung rushed to attack. The guy suddenly stopped in front of his opponent. He narrowed his eyes and his eyes began to glow. The hair on Hajin's head stood on end. Yusung kicked the guy with a roundhouse kick. The spectators in their seats opened their mouths in surprise. Yuhana couldn't help but let out a sigh of admiration. The director tried his best to keep a mask of imperturbability, but surprise broke through. The girl with glasses also opened her mouth in shock. Hajin fell on his back and Yuhana announced that he was knocked out because Yusung immediately broke through the protective barrier and knocked out his opponent. Yusung was surprised to hear that he was the winner. The girl with pink hair quietly whispered something under her breath. She began to clap her hands, surprised that Yusung actually won. The boy opened his eyes and immediately groaned because the ceiling began to bend. He could barely tell that he was in pain. Hajin immediately jumped up on the couch and asked where he was, to which the nurse asked where he thought he was. The woman smiled, saying that the boy was in the hospital wing. She brought a glass of Ajin medicine and asked him to drink it and then rest, to which he was forced to agree. He remembered that he didn't even see at what moment Yusung snuck up on him. The boy thought hard, replaying his recent fight in his head. Hajin realized that Yusung was definitely not an F rank, and his body immediately began to tremble. Meanwhile, in the director's office, the director looked annoyed when he called Yusung to his office. The boy, trying to remain calm, looked at Byung-chul. The man smirked. His face was filled with delight when Benchel congratulated Yusung on entering the Aeon Academy. The man handed him the juice and said that he knew the boy would do well, and Yusung thanked the director. Byung-chul thought about Woha and how the boy, although F rank, was still a disciple of the Fist King, and he didn't even have to worry because he promised that this time it would be for real. Byung-chul looked at Yusung chewing and thought that he couldn't trust him completely yet. The director said with a smile that of course the entrance practical exam was just the beginning. He explained that if Yusung aimed to become the strongest hunter like his teacher the Fist King, then he only needed to aim for one goal. He raised his finger, indicating the importance of the information. The director told him about the Star 7. They were considered the 7 best students in the academy. Yoon took a sip of his drink and muttered about the Star 7. Byung-chul thought about how of course there had never been a case in the history of the academy where an F-rank member of the Star 7 had become one. Yusung thoughtfully asked if he could become one of them, to which the principal answered in the affirmative. Byung-chul smiled and said that the path to the 7 was open to everyone. Yusung heard that there were only 7 of them, and they were the best of the best. The door to the office opened and a student asked permission to enter. Byung-chul looked out from behind Yusung and exclaimed that the student had already arrived, then offered to come in. As the student entered, the principal said that since Yusung was new, he called one of the students to bring him up to speed. Sue waved, said hello, and said that it was him again. The students looked at the couple walking down the hallway in surprise when Yu said that he was told that Yusung needed a tour guide around the academy. Sue walked with his hands behind his back and said that he and Yusung already knew each other, so he volunteered, to which the guy thanked him heartily. Suddenly Sue perked up, because he remembered that he had not yet introduced himself. He extended his hand to the guy and said his name. He said that it was nice to meet Yusung. Yusung heard Sue suggesting to call him by his first name, which touched him. He was a little embarrassed, which made his cheeks turn pink. The guys shook hands as a sign of auspicious acquaintance. Yusung and Sue did not notice that they were being stared at, because they were carried away by the conversation about Sue watching Yuso's fight, and it was not that because he did not think that Yusung would smash Hajin utterly. Sue closed his eyes, remembering that episode, saying that he knocked Hajin out with one punch. Outside the window, meanwhile, clouds were gathering and it became completely dark. Heavy footsteps were heard in the hallway, but Sue continued to chatter carefree about what was understandable since Yusung was a disciple of the Fist King. The students began to run away, letting the people pass, while Yusung told his newfound friend that he still had a lot to learn, while the interlocutor cheerfully asked him not to stick around, since he had even surprised the elders. The girl, who had caused such a stir among the other students, heard that Hajin was a high level. She folded her arms over her chest and waited for them to finally pay attention to her. Sue wanted to say something more about Hajin's rank, but they were told to get out of the way. At that moment, lightning flashed outside the window, adding drama to the scene. The girl's green eyes turned no less dangerously than the lightning had recently. She recognized Yusung, and her expression did not bode well. Sue immediately bowed, justifying himself by saying that they had simply been chatting. He looked at Yusung, who didn't even move when the girl approached. He just looked at her in fear, unable to move. The girl asked if he was a new student. Lee Hyuk, who was standing next to her, was the class representative's assistant, a third year, S rank, and ranked second, asked Yusung what he was doing and why he was standing in the middle of the row, to which the girl stopped him with a wave of her hand, saying that it seemed like he was speechless since it wasn't their first time meeting. Yusung pressed his lips tightly together in anger when he heard that the girl never thought that their next meeting would happen at the academy. She smiled sweetly, although her tone was rude and arrogant. She walked close to Yusung, as if she was going to stop next to him. However, she simply walked past. Yusung heard her whisper that there was always a black sheep in every family, just like in his case. The girl glanced at him for a moment without turning her head. As soon as they left, the hallway began to buzz again, and Sue looked after the girl and Lee Hyuk. He thought about how he knew something was wrong here. He looked at the frozen Yusung and realized that he was from the same Shin family. Yusung remembered that mocking voice that brought him to tears with questions about how he felt when he first learned that he was born defective. Then the same girl who just passed by him said that she was really interested because he was complete and he was not. At that moment, she mocked Yusung and seemed like an ugly monster. Yusung felt like he was in the merciless claws of a spider. The boy woke up from his memories as someone insistently called him. Sue looked at him worriedly, asking what was going on since there was no face in the arena, to which Yuan tried to say that everything was fine. But Sue understood everything and suggested that his comrade go to his room in the dorm and rest for the rest of the day. He looked out the window and said that it was still raining, so he would show the academy next time, but for now he would take the guy to his room. Yusun agreed with him with a lifeless voice. Finally, they reached Yusun's room. Siu looked into the room with some annoyance on his face. The decor was simple, since it only contained the necessary things, so he asked if newbies were really placed in such rooms. He awkwardly scratched his cheeks and said that, however, Yusun should not worry, since he would soon earn a rank and get a better room. However, Yusun was pleased, because after sleeping in the trees, this room was exactly what he needed, which made Siu happy. He handed Yuan the key and said that he had sent his number to his pocket computer. The guy was a little worried about his friend, so he asked him not to hesitate to ask questions if he had any. Yusun smiled good-naturedly and thanked Siu from the bottom of his heart for his help. He waved goodbye and left the room. Yusun began to undress. He went to the shower and washed his hair for a long time under hot streams of water. Then, without getting dressed, as was his habit, he went into the room and opened the refrigerator. There, his attention was drawn to banana juice. He immediately pierced the lid with a straw. Yusun fell onto the bed, and his hair was scattered across the pillow. The rain continued to rustle outside the window. Yusun glanced at the window. He looked at the wall of drops and thought that it had rained that day, too. Back then, the trees were bending under the gusts of wind. The rain poured incessantly. Yusun watched the weather from the car. He was riding in the back seat and looking out the window. The man turned to him and said that the boy had every right to hate him. He turned away and said bitterly that everyone was given potential at birth. The entire family was sitting in the front seats, and only Yusun was alone in the back when the man said that dreams that exceeded this potential were futile and harmful to a person. The boy, without looking up from his contemplation, heard that he was born into the Shin family and should understand everything. Yusun bowed his head and agreed with this. The car drove along the road past the forest belt. Yusun looked at the approaching building with fear. A girl approached the car, hiding from the rain under a transparent umbrella. She leaned over to Yusun and took his hand. Then she led go away, who obediently followed the stranger. Yusun turned around one last time. However, the car was already turning around without any regrets. Yusun sadly turned away. These were memories that caused pain. However, back then, falling asleep among many other children, he did not shed a tear. At that time, Yusun was sure that he himself was to blame for everything. For example, that he did not live up to the expectations of his parents. Yusun considered himself guilty of being born an F rank. He blamed himself for not being like his older sister. They expelled him from the family for these reasons, or so he thought. Yusun believed that if you do not perceive it as something sad, it will not sadden him. However, it was impossible from the start, because he was born weak. Yusung believed that he was born inferior, not like his sister. So Yusung tried to smile even when it was unbearably painful. So he just did what he was told and went where he was led. Until one day, Manhwa, the lucky king and the strongest hunter in the world, appeared. Then he said that Yusung had the potential to surpass him, so he offered to go with him. For Yusung, this story was like a dream. So then he said that he did not want to, because he had already realized something. Manhwa was surprised at how mature the phrase of a little boy about being tired sounded. At that time, dreams only ended in despair for him, and if Manhwa expected something from him, he would still be disappointed in the end. Yusung believed that if he was not destined, then it was better to stay. Then the boy heard that for his age, he was very smart. However, Manhwa thought that Yusung was wrong, because a strong person is not someone who is never disappointed. Manhwa came closer to the boy. He sat down next to him and said that a strong person is not someone who never makes mistakes. He dropped the umbrella. Yusung looked at the man in surprise, hearing that he was once like the boy. Manhwa said that only after experiencing a great many troubles and disappointments does a person become strong, and when he falls, the strong one gets up. Unlike others, he is able to do this again and again. The man wanted to tell Yusung that even if he cries or falls into despair, Manhwa will teach him to get up and move on. At that moment, the darkness enveloping Yusung's consciousness seemed to retreat. It released its tenacious paws from the boy's head. Eventually, the darkness left him, leaving room for the light. Manhwa's hand was the first color picture in the boy's memory. Then Manhwa said that Yusung could become the strongest hunter in the world. Then the man said that he would guarantee it to the boy. Yusung extended his small hand. He felt a huge surge of energy as soon as he touched Manhwa. Of course, everything was different now, and this memory brought him more joy than pain, because the old memories were overlapping with new ones. The rain was still pounding the glass. The bracelet on Yusung's hand vibrated because a new message had arrived. Yusung lazily looked at the dialogue box that popped up. Sue was asking the boy if he liked the room and asking him to let him know if he needed anything, because he hadn't been himself since that meeting in the hallway. Yusung smiled happily. He wrote that everything was fine now and thanked Sue for his support. Yusung decided that the past didn't matter. He closed his eyes, because now it really did. Bright rays of sunlight were shining through the window. It was already past 7 o'clock when the alarm rang. Pink hair was scattered on the pillow, and the girl's hand crawled through it. She reached for the alarm to turn off its annoying beep. The girl opened her eyes with difficulty. She sat up in bed and stretched sweetly. There was a sound notifying that the toast was ready. She spread raspberry jam on the toast and put it on a plate with breakfast. The girl ate breakfast with appetite. Suddenly, the hairpin began to vibrate. The girl perked up in surprise and reached for it. He smiled, as if she heard good news. She headed for the exit, saying that she was already leaving. The girl walked in the stream of other students and thought that a month had already passed, but she was still worried on the way to Gaon Academy. She knew that the academy had amazing devices, training rooms, virtual technique practice, the largest battle hall in the city. There were even modern mana recovery devices. However, these devices were not available to everyone. Only the best students could make full use of them. Ordinary students like Hanajima, who was currently a first-year student, ranked F and ranked 659th, could only dream of such a thing. She froze and looked at the academy building, completely ignoring the hustle and bustle around her. Every time she looked at it on the way, but each time she realized how far she was from all this. Today was the first time she saw this hall with her own eyes. The man standing in front of the students clapped his hands a couple of times, drawing their attention to himself, and then demanded that they stop chatting. He greeted the students with a smile, after which he introduced himself as Lin. One of the students decided to ask the man if today's class wasn't supposed to be taught by teacher Manhwa. The students immediately began to listen attentively when Lin said that this would no longer happen because he had left the academy and gone to China, but the students should not worry about it. Lin turned out to be an instructor and a 5th class hunter, so if the students trusted him, he would teach them properly, because part of the process was training in an lab that was only available to the best students. He began to say something about the students being NZ Koren, when the doors to the hall slammed open and Sue and Yusung ran in, apologizing as they went for being late. Sue pointed at the embarrassed Yusung and said that he was helping a new student, and Yusung immediately introduced himself. Hanajima immediately looked at the boy, embarrassed. He was the same student that the girl had seen in the hall. Len folded his arms over his chest and smiled good-naturedly, saying that this is what he is like, a student of the Fist King, which Yusung immediately confirmed. Lin closed his eyes, thinking that an F-rank disciple of a legendary hunter was an interesting combination. He decided to scan the guy's mana, which flowed evenly throughout his entire body, and immediately exclaimed in surprise. Lin placed his hand on Yusung's shoulder and said that it was great because he could see that the guy was not slacking off. Yusung smiled disarmingly, saying that he did not miss a day of training. Lin gave a thumbs up in approval, admiring the guy's spirit, because sincerity and courage are very important for a hunter. The students looked at the satisfied teacher and student and began to whisper among themselves about the F rank being recognized by a 5th class hunter. Lin became serious when he said that he wanted to test the guy's skill. He pointed to the renovated training hall and said that this place was the best place to prove that all the rumors were true. He explained that everything was already prepared for this, then asked if there was anything that needed to be explained, because if not, the boy had to touch the hologram to set the difficulty, and it was quite simple. Yusung agreed, then called up the system window, setting the training difficulty to the 3rd rank of danger and high difficulty. The students began to whisper in shock that the boy was not joking, selecting the 3rd rank. The system window reported that the monsters would be random, namely, the orc battle army dropped out, so the setting was complete, and the difficulty remained high, which greatly impressed Hanajima. Yusung poked at the icon, and the system window reported that setting the high difficulty accompanied the orc's intelligence increase by 150%. The number of bosses increased to 3, and their strength was multiplied by 2. After that, the next window reported that the training battle setting was complete. Yusung calmly looked at the teacher, saying that then he would begin. Lin looked taken aback as he agreed that the boy could begin already. He frowned, not knowing if the boy was joking or not, because the danger of the rank and the high difficulty couldn't cause any harm, because you can't get hurt in the training hall, but it was strange to see such a choice from an F rank. Lin wondered if this was a bluff or unwavering confidence as he watched Yusung walk determinedly towards the training ground. Yusung looked at the system window, which reported that the arena had set itself to the Randall Pat Desert. He calmly watched the loading window, which was currently frozen at 85%. Finally, Yusung found himself in the middle of the desert and realized that this was the hall. Someone's heavy foot stepped onto the hot sand. One orc was holding a halberd. The second had an axe. The 3rd orc brazenly bared his fangs. The group of orcs that were ahead looked terrifying. One of them rudely asked Yusung how dared to invade their tribe's lands. He ordered to kill the guy, and the orcs immediately rushed to attack. Yusung sighed heavily and prepared for battle. He used concentration enhancement, and his eyes immediately began to glow blue. The boy felt that there was someone behind the rock that was behind the enemies. A closer analysis showed that archers were hiding there. They were ready to shoot arrows forward. The monster opened its mouth wide. This was a typical strategy for melee and ranged fighters. A sharp axe appeared right in front of the boy. Closing his eyes, he decided what to do. The hunter grabbed the shaft of the enemy's spear. The axes hit its tip. The protagonist looked forward resolutely. His hand grabbed the orc's face. Yusung managed to knock him to the ground. Other monsters pounced on him from behind. The boy turned around and repelled their attacks. Having defended himself from the enemies, the boy looked forward. The archers attacked him from behind the stone. A sharp arrow was right in front of his eye. Blood spurted. Having looked out and looked at the battlefield, the monsters did not see their opponent. The hunter was behind them. Clouds floated across the sky. Groans and screams were heard. A notification informed that the user had finished training. The desert landscape dissipated. The protagonist found himself in the office. Siu's mouth opened in surprise. The system congratulated the user on setting a new record. Hanajima blushed with embarrassment. Raising his eyebrows in amazement, Lin wondered if his student really corresponded to the level of a first year. The teacher smiled and realized that he could really join the Star 7. Yusung brushed off his jacket. Fluorescent lights were burning under the ceiling. Smiling widely, Siu called his friend cool. Walking up to the drink machine, the boy was surprised that his friend had set a new record in his first lesson. Looking at him, the guy said that his skills were simply incredible. The hunter raised his eyebrows in surprise and asked what they were talking about. It turned out that the academy had a ranking system. A can of soda fell down. Taking it in his hands and sitting down on the bench, the student explained that this system was both an indicator of skills and a rank division. Raising his index finger, he added that the top 7 students were called the Star 7. Looking down, Siu explained that low-ranking students would never be able to rise to the top. The boy took a sip. The protagonist frowned thoughtfully. Adela raised her head. In front of her was a system window. Suddenly, something made her flinch. The notification showed a leaderboard. Seeing that someone had displaced her from first place, the girl's eyes widened in surprise. She lowered her hands and thought that her heart was about to jump out of her chest. There were blocks of ice around her. Squinting, the girl thought about the person who could defeat her grandfather. The huntress looked down. Her watch lit up. A new message was received. Adela raised her hand and looked at her watch. The system informed that the first semester exam would be held soon. Smiling, Siu said that they would make an announcement soon. The protagonist smiled back. The system asked him to confirm his participation. Yusung touched the hologram. Clicking on the watch, the boy read that the exam results directly depended on the opponent he would be matched with. The system asked who his partner was. The boy's eyes widened. Lowering the corners of his lips, he answered that his partner would be Hanajima. The corresponding information appeared on the system window. The girl blushed and trembled. Seeing the notification, she asked in horror what it meant. The students were sitting in the cafeteria. Someone was ordering food at the counter. The student turned to his friend and said that during the exam, it was more important to hold out as long as possible than to get a high grade. Sitting at the table, the girl said that her friend was paired with a high-ranking representative. Looking menacingly at his classmate, Hichin said that one should listen to the one with a higher rank when there is a disagreement. Algeri noted that their ranks were not that different. The protagonist looked at his classmates. He had a worried look because all the talk was only about the exams. Sitting opposite him, Sue explained that the entire next year of study depended on this exam. For those who get a good grade, there will be privileges. Sitting down at their table, the girl said that real hell awaits those who get a bad grade. Runya winked and said that she was very pleased to meet the guys. Yusung smiled and said that the feeling was mutual. Blushing with happiness, the girl called him very friendly. With wide eyes, she asked him to marry her after graduation. The boy looked at her in confusion and blushed with embarrassment. Frowning, Siu asked his classmate not to joke like that. The student said that it was not a joke at all. There were trays of food on the table. The guy noted that they were not obliged to sit at the same table just because they were paired. Runya said that she did not come to him, but to the main character. Narrowing his eyes in displeasure, the student concluded that she was interested in who his partner would be. Licking her lips, the girl asked if it was really that noticeable. Continuing to eat, Yusung only watched their conversation. Seeing that his partner would be Hanajima, the girl widened her eyes in shock. The boy said that he knew she would be surprised. The boy tilted his head and asked why everyone was surprised by this information. His friend scratched his cheek shyly. Looking away, he explained that Hanajima was ranked lower than F. The student clasped her hands thoughtfully. Frowning, Runya explained that she had been treated well in their class, but only at the beginning. The girl looked at the floor, clutching her skirt in her hands. Everyone thought that she was just very shy, which is why she acted like that and spoke in a barely audible voice. Without looking up, the girl greeted him. Her classmate raised her head. Many wanted to help her fit in with the group. Leaning on her hands, Runya explained that on the very first day when she was transferred to the academy, strange rumors began to circulate about her. At night, when no one was in the class, one boy returned for something he had forgotten. Entering the room, he was stunned with horror. Hanajima nervously wrote something in her notebook, radiating a dark energy. The next day, another student noticed that she dropped her handkerchief. Turning around, the student tried to call out to her, but the girl quickly disappeared. Picking up the handkerchief, the boy noticed that something was wrong with it. There was a tangle of long hair inside. There were many people lying around the girl. There were many rumors that she transferred to a Korean academy because she sent her entire class to intensive care. She had a crazy grin on her face. Raising her hand to her mouth, Runya said that she did not believe all these rumors. The protagonist smiled and asked why. The girl explained that despite these terrible rumors, her classmate was simply a terrible hunter, her lips trembling. On the ground lay a skull. Seeing it, Hanajima opened her mouth in fear. The girl raised her eyebrows pitifully and said that she had absolutely no strength. Sue confirmed that this student was the worst even among the F rank, although this was not the case before. Looking down, Yusin wanted to know more about her and realized that this was only possible in a personal conversation. The student sat down next to him and apologized. The guys looked at her in surprise. Without looking up, the student apologized for the fact that her classmate would have to be paired with her. With tears in her eyes, Hanajima said that she was very sorry. With their mouths open in shock, the heroes realized that she had heard their entire conversation. Blushing with shame, the girl explained that she understood perfectly well that they did not like to see her, because everyone avoided her due to the fact that she could not handle even first-rank monsters and did not know how to summon creatures. Getting up from the table, Sue said that it was time for him to go. Closing her eyes, Runya remembered that she forgot to feed her goldfish. They quickly ran away. The boy looked after them. After an awkward pause, the guy suggested that the classmate sitting next to him go for a walk. The heroes went out into the blooming garden. Taking 2 drinks in his hands, the hunter offered one of them to his partner. Hanajima brought the bottle to her mouth. Lowering her hands, the girl called herself useless. Rounding her eyes, she explained that all the rumors about her were the result of a huge misunderstanding. One day, she was seen at her desk in a gloomy environment. In fact, the girl was writing down her expenses in a notebook. Remembering her hair in a scarf, the student blushed. Lowering the corners of her lips, she said that it was all because of her ability. Squinting, the protagonist asked what kind of ability it was. Taking the hair in her hands, the student explained that her skill was called the Administrator of the Dead, a very specific necromantic ability from the category of black magic. Hanajima stood up from the bench. The girl frowned pitifully and said that this was the only ability available to her now. Opening her mouth, she added that she needed the hair as a sacrifice. After casting the spell, her hair caught fire. Throwing it to the ground, the girl asked those sleeping in the ground to protect her. The hair fell on the grass. A cloud of dark energy appeared from it. It began to grow. Suddenly, a burning eye flashed in it. Yusun watched what was happening in surprise. He had a tense look. The viscous mucus took on a humanoid shape. A human skull was visible from under it. Some time ago, the student cast a spell. The hair in her hand caught fire. It fell from her hand. A viscous black liquid appeared on the grass. The witch's eyes widened in fear when she saw the monster. A glowing eye flashed in the skull. The skeleton lowered its hands in embarrassment. Frowning, Hanajima explained that there was one problem with her ability. Pointing her finger forward, the girl asked the summoned creature to attack the tree. The skeleton frowned and nodded. He walked up to the tree. The living dead man hit the tree with his fist. The tree trunk trembled. The monster's fingers cracked. Seeing that the skeleton had fallen apart, the girl put her hands to her cheeks. Squinting, the guy realized that his classmate could summon creatures with her hair. Frowning sternly, the hunter thought that she had become weaker after transferring to a new school. Raising his head, the protagonist called out to her. Smiling, Yusun asked if she really had no friends at all. Blushing with embarrassment, the student was unable to answer. The witch looked down and said that she was considered strange and too weak because of her ability. Putting a hand to her chin, the boy guessed that she had previously asked her Japanese friends for hair, but now, in Korea, she had no support. Squinting, the boy realized that she had no one else to ask for hair from, and the strong students would have refused such a thing at all. Hanajima put her hands to her chest when she was called. The hunter held out his hair to her. The girl, her eyes wide in surprise, asked if her classmate really wanted to give her his hair. The protagonist explained that he understood that she needed it for necromancy. The girl opened her mouth in shock. Her cheeks were red. Seeing something, she raised her eyebrows in amazement. A skeleton stood in front of the heroes. He had strong arms. Fire burned in his eyes. The corpse stood motionless. The student noticed that his eyes were clearer than those of her other minions. The monster flinched when asked to attack the tree. It looked at the tree next to it. The skeleton looked away. At the same time, the monster jumped up. The corpse hit the trunk with all its might. His fist left a deep mark. Blue energy oozed from the fist. The witch's eyes widened in surprise. Yusung smiled. The mark left on the trunk lit up. An explosion of bright energy was heard behind the skeleton. Hanajima, her mouth hanging open, said that this couldn't be happening. Raising her eyebrows, she explained that her ability only allowed her to use 30% of the victim's power. The girl looked at her friend when he said that this should be enough. He looked confident. Smiling happily, the girl wanted to be friends with him. The student took her classmate's hand. Pulling it, the witch asked him to give her 10 of his hairs. Yusung said that was too much. A mark appeared on the map. The man watched the changes in the system. Someone entered the room. Byung-chul asked if his colleague had been an examiner at the exam before. Lin approached him and said no, adding that he had prepared thoroughly so as not to make a single mistake. The principal explained that he had nothing to worry about on the precious island. Smiling, the teacher said that he had warned his students to be careful. With his hands behind his back, the man explained that there was a time when freshmen had passed this exam by acting bravely, but that was an isolated incident. Lin realized that he was talking about the current head of the school. Looking at the map, he concluded that Han's achievement had surprised everyone at Makchanru Academy. Byung-chul called her a genius with natural talent and explained that she was born into the respected Shin family. There was a black mark on the map. The principal said that only a monster can kill a monster. On the black mark was a monster's head. A huge ship was sailing on the sea. The blue sky hung above it. White hair fluttered in the wind. Adela put her hands on the railing. Her eyes were closed. Someone asked what she was doing. The girl looked back. A brunette was standing behind her. Crossing her arms over her chest, Yuna asked why her classmate was so serious. The girl walked past her. Running up to her, the student asked her not to ignore her. She ran forward and spread her arms. Smiling, the student offered her classmate to fight and said that there was a training ground here. Adela looked at her thoughtfully. Lowering the corners of her lips, the girl said that only 3 days had passed. Frowning, the brunette asked what that meant. In the past, Yuna pursed her lips in displeasure. 3 days ago, the girl raised her hand over her and won the duel. Raising her hand, the student said that she would succeed this time. The huntress refused the duel. Looking away, she asked why her classmate was so intrusive. Blushing with impatience, the student said that she could not accept her defeat. Lightning flashed between the heroines. Someone called out to the main character. Adela shuddered. The girl turned around. The brunette looked away in confusion. The students surrounded Yusung, who had just entered the academy. The boy was smiling. The girl frowned. Her classmate silently looked at the boy. Crossing her arms over her chest, Yuna noted that she had not cared about the newcomers before. Smirking, she asked if the student of the Fist King who defeated her grandfather really deserved so much attention. Throwing a displeased look at her, the student said that it was none of her business. Spreading her arms, the student laughed at her. The brunette came close to her classmate. Squinting slyly, Yuna said that it was time to change the first place in the ranking. Adela walked past her. The girl looked back and said that in that case her competitor would become the third. Raising her hand, the girl shouted that she had not said everything yet. Lightning flashed around her. Frowning menacingly, she tried to attract attention. The student thought that her rival had ruined her mood with an angry frown. The student looked away. The protagonist was protecting his partner from seagulls. Someone pointed with a pointer to the summary of the second semester exam. Standing in front of his friends, Sue said that he would tell about the island and explain that he had done additional research especially for the newcomer. In fact, the precious island was a whale with mountains on its back. The boss of the 7th grade swallowed a huge ship. A newspaper clipping appeared on the board. The article told how the Fist King destroyed the whale. Renia asked how the whale turned into an island. The boy put his hand to his chin, not knowing what to answer. Hanajima stood up from the table. Everyone looked at her. Raising her hand, the girl explained that it was all about the mana that the whale had. Smiling, the boy confirmed this and explained that due to the remnants of mana, the whale's corpse petrified and turned into a huge island. Turning on a photo of a crystal, the student explained that all sorts of creatures fed on this mana. A green beetle sat on a leaf. The insect spread its wings. In front of him was a huge orange crystal. An entire ecosystem was born on the island. Various animals were depicted on the screen. The island was called Precious because each monster had a precious stone on it. Holding a drink in his hands, the protagonist suggested that this happened because of the reef's reaction to mana. Sue said that it was not that important and said that in order to pass the exam, you need to collect these precious stones. Seeing the ranking table, Renia's eyes widened in surprise and said that a golem was worth as much as 200 points. The boy squinted slyly and said that no one had ever managed to defeat the golem because it was a third-class boss. Waving his hand, the boy suggested aiming at ordinary first and second-class monsters. The boys looked at their comrade with admiration. Getting up from the table, the girl suggested taking a rest because they were on a cruise ship. Hearing that this was a great opportunity to try incredible dishes, Hanajima shuddered with interest. Joyful exclamations were heard. The heroes were sitting in a cafe, enjoying the most delicious food. There was a huge cake on the table. The boys discussed the incomparable taste of the food. Having moved to another table, they began to eat tender meat. Having started on desserts, the students ate their fill. Puffing out his cheeks, Sue said that he couldn't fit any more food in him. The heroes went out on deck. It was already evening. Closing his eyes, the boy realized that he had overeaten. Renia said that she was already sick of the amount of food she had eaten. Smiling, the main character said that he liked everything. Hanajima closed her eyes contentedly. The guys decided to go to bed. Looking after them, Yusin and his partner said goodbye to them. The girl blushed. The guy was holding a drink in his hands. Looking down, the girl said that today had flown by. Looking at the sky, the hunter agreed with her and said that he had never even dreamed of something like this before. The stars were shining in the sky. The students would arrive at the precious island tomorrow. Clutching a drink in her hands, the witch said that she did not want to be a burden to her friend. She waved her hands and apologized for talking about something sad on such a nice day. The protagonist smiled. Hanajima explained that she always worries when something good happens because she is afraid of making a mistake and ruining everything. The girl continued to hold the drink in her hands. Yusung said that everything was fine. Looking up, the girl asked what it meant. Smiling, the boy asked her not to blame herself because everyone makes mistakes and promised to help her because they are on the same team. The student blushed embarrassedly. Looking away, she called her partner very kind. Putting her palms together, the witch said that he does not seem like someone who makes mistakes. The boy lowered his head and thought about it. In the past, a hunter caught a bear cub. One pointed behind him. A fearsome she-bear stood behind him. The predator chased after the villain who stole her child. Holding a boar on his shoulder, the Fist King asked what his student was doing. The protagonist licked his lips and said that these mushrooms were very tasty. Sitting down next to him, the man remembered that these mushrooms were poisonous. The poisoned Yusin was lying under the blanket. The old man looked back, hearing that his student was ready. The boy smiled happily. Wanda explained that things were not carried like that. Looking down, the boy said that he also makes a lot of mistakes. Hanajima looked at him in surprise. The hunter said that his teacher always guided him on the right path. Being a very important person to his student, the Fist King extended his hand to him. The protagonist narrowed his eyes. He flinched when the girl expressed her understanding. Raising her eyebrows, she said that she also had a very good family. Suddenly lowering her head, the girl explained that they had not seen each other since she entered the academy. Yusung assumed that his partner really missed her family. Looking at him, the student said that everything was fine because entering the academy was her desire. The witch told him that some of them were looking through old photos while fiddling with her fingers. A smile appeared on her face. Hanajima asked if her friend wanted to look at the photos. A blush appeared on her cheeks. The photo showed her entire family. The girl smiled happily and called them cute, and the boy agreed with her. Suddenly, his expression became serious and he wanted to ask her something. The girl widened her eyes and asked him what he was interested in. Clouds floated across the dark sky. Raising his hand, the boy asked why his friend had transferred to such a remote place, and quickly said that he did not believe the rumors that she had bullied her classmates. The smile disappeared from the student's face. She looked shocked. The witch widened her eyes and did not know what to answer. Hanajima lowered her head. She was holding a photo in her hands. A few moments ago, the hunter looked at her and asked why his classmate had moved so far from her homeland. The girl gave him a surprised look. Her eyes darted back and forth. The protagonist watched her silently. The girl clutched a photograph in her hands. Suddenly, a seal appeared on her hand. In the past, when she was at school, her hand caught fire. The student looked at the seal in shock. Many skeletons appeared around. The student's eyes turned white. He opened his mouth in fear and screamed. A dark silhouette was visible in his eyes. The flash became even brighter. Tears were streaming down the witch's cheeks. There was a vase of flowers on the desk. The crippled classmates gathered around, blaming Hanajima for what happened. The schoolgirl with a bandage on her hand called her shameless because they suffered because of her. The boy with crutches said that it happened because of her habit of tying her hair. The classmate looked at her upset. The girl looked up. Bursting into tears, the girl explained that she was simply greedy. The chair fell to the floor. Walking away, the student was upset that she could not stop in time. Tears dripped down her chin. Her eyes widened when she heard the apology. The protagonist covered her hand with his. Squinting, Yusen asked her not to tell him about it if the memories hurt her. The witch looked at him in surprise. Looking down, Hanajima apologized. Looking up at the sky, the boy asked her not to apologize because everyone keeps their secrets. The girl's eyes lit up. She pursed her lips and blushed. Smiling, the girl called her friend very kind. The moon was shining above them. In the morning, the bright sun rose over the ship. High cliffs were visible ahead. Seagulls were flying above the ground. Lin watched them silently. Closing his eyes, the teacher was glad that they had finally arrived at the place. Ahead was a huge multicolored crystal. Someone stepped in a puddle. The student ran through the forest, breathing heavily. Monsters were peeking out from behind the trees. The schoolboy looked back in fear. He pursed his lips. The student raised his head and begged for help. All around him was a dense forest. Precious Island, Day 1, in the middle of the forest was a huge orange crystal. Hanajima took a handkerchief out of her pocket. The girl was about to open it. Frowning, she decided to show her strength at all costs. Standing in front of the students, Lin explained that monsters can be mined for gems corresponding to their rank. Holding the crystal in his hand, the teacher explained that the higher the rank of the monster, the more points you can get for it. The stone began to shine. The man added that each of the students can enter the stone into their pocket computer to get points. Putting his hand behind his back, the mentor said that the rules of the exam are very simple and said that within 2 days the guys must collect as many crystals as possible. The girl resolutely knitted her eyebrows. Lowering her gaze, the student thought that she did not want to become a burden. The protagonist approached her, frightening her. When they reached a fork in the road, Yusen suggested that they split up. Frowning, the witch realized that they would be able to collect more gems that way. Smiling, the boy reminded her that his hair should be enough to defeat any opponent below rank 3. He took his partner's hands. Looking at her, the boy asked her not to be afraid of anything. Raising his eyebrows, the hunter said that she would succeed. Hanajima looked at him in amazement, her eyes sparkling. The boys went their separate ways. The girl put her hand to her chest, watching her friend go. Puffing out her cheeks, she decided that she would succeed. Looking at her hand, the girl thought that she had a formidable weapon with her. In her palm lay a handkerchief with her comrade's hair. Walking forward along the path, the student decided to use one of them now. Something approached her. The witch turned around. Seeing something, she opened her mouth in fear and screamed. A heart-rending scream rang out over the green forest. A snake was crawling along a tree branch. Suddenly, a sharp blade pierced it. Frowning, Sue realized that he had earned 1 point. Looking back, the boy asked his partner to be careful. Pulling the bowstring, he explained that it would be better to refrain from using skills and use his main power in measured doses. Summoning fire in her hand, Runia said that she already knew this very well, and asked her comrade to continue searching for prey using his clairvoyance skill. Looking down, the boy said that there was a deer in the 3rd square. The monster ran out from behind the bushes at them. Seeing it, the girl turned around. Fire burst into flames in her hands. The animal's body was engulfed in flames. Looking at her partner, the girl asked him to warn her of the enemy's appearance a little in advance. A huge boar ran out of the forest. Without wasting a second, the hunter fired an arrow at it. None of the forces left even a scratch on the monster. Gritting his teeth, Sue realized that the bow would not help here. The animal knocked him down. The system reported that 60% of the defense remained. The boy's eyes widened in fear. Suddenly, he squinted tensely. A knife appeared in his hands. The boy thrust it into the enemy's back. The pyromancer rushed to his aid. The boar died. The hunter sighed with relief. In his hand was a wide knife. Frowning, Sue said that his ineptitude in shooting let him down. Running up to him, Rinia asked if everything was okay. The boy replied that everything was fine, but his defense had fallen. The knife dissolved in his hand. Looking at it, the boy thought that he was ashamed to receive such help again. The girl placed her hand on his waist and offered him a rest. The hunter realized that this was a great opportunity to restore his defense. The girl promised to prepare everything. Raising her hand, her partner thanked her. He fell to the ground. Smiling, Sue thought that since the beginning of the exam, their lives were constantly in danger. Looking at the blue sky, the boy wondered how his friends were doing and realized that his comrade would definitely fix the situation if something went wrong. The camera emitted a blue light. A drone was flying over the forest. A group of people were running through the forest. Frowning furiously, the blonde asked who could have thought of making the emerald elephant so strong. Looking at her, the brunette offered to attack him together, but the girl refused. Something ran between the trees. The girl shouted that they would never be able to defeat a third-rank monster. Suddenly, the hunters stopped and opened their mouths in shock. They backed away. There was a dead end in front of them. Hearing a loud roar, the students froze in place and realized that their end had come. A huge elephant ran out of the forest. The animal roared, its eyes flashing with fire. The boys turned around and realized that they had no other choice. Weapons appeared in their hands. Rushing forward, the students decided to go for a frontal attack. Putting his hands on the ground, the guy used a poison trap. Green slime immobilized the monster. Looking back, the young man called his friends for help. The girl with the hammer rushed forward. Her friend opened her mouth wide. Swinging her hand, she used a special move, a dakibai throw. Finding herself in the air, the huntress swung her hammer. Resolutely knitting her eyebrows, the girl shouted that this was a great height. The girl squeezed the shaft in her hand. Her hammer caught fire thanks to the atomic strike. A flash appeared above the elephant's head. Clenching her fist, the brunette asked if they really succeeded. The huntress frowned sternly. Suddenly, her eyes widened. The blow left no trace on the monster's skin. The animal threw the enemy off its head. Running away, the girl shouted that it didn't work. Clenching her fists, the blonde realized that they had only one option left and asked her friends to stand closer to her. Thanks to the sacred defense skill, a dome appeared over the guys. The elephant destroyed it with just one swing of its trunk. Falling to the ground, the girl realized that now it was all over. Looking at the monster, the brunette asked if this was really their end. The captain confirmed it. Putting her hand on her shoulder, the huntress wanted to say something, but the student said that they could discuss it at the hospital. Suddenly, someone's long hair sparkled in the forest. The animal pounced on the defenseless students. Suddenly, the main character appeared in front of them. Squinting, Yusen noticed the enemy. The girls stared at him in surprise. The elephant approached them. The boy swung his hand. With one blow, he managed to knock the monster to the ground. The girls opened their mouths in shock. Smiling, the boy asked if he could collect the reward for this monster. The students realized that this was the new one everyone was talking about. Smiling, the hunter thought that everything was going according to plan and wondered how his friend was doing. Clouds floated above the forest. A scream was heard. Hanajima fell to the ground and put her hand to her head. The girl, opening her mouth in surprise, asked what that sound was. The beast raised its ears. There was a gem on its forehead. The squirrel took a step forward. Putting her hands to her chest, the girl thought that she was very lucky. Looking at the animal, she asked what it was trying to do. The monster grabbed the scarf with hair in its teeth. Reaching out, the student said that it was inedible. Closing her eyes, the witch asked the beast to be obedient. The squirrel looked up. The monster hit the huntress with its tail. Putting her hand to her cheek, Hanajima wondered how she could get her handkerchief back. She picked a flower. Handing it to the animal, the girl offered to exchange. The beast looked at the clover in confusion. Perking up its ears, it hissed. With tears in its eyes, the girl realized that it did not like the smell and said that she had no other delicacies. Putting a hand to her chin, the student remembered something. She laid out a piece of cloth on the ground. On it lay the picked flowers. The witch took a pestle and began to pound the plants. Then the huntress added some honey. The squirrel watched her in surprise. Smiling, Hanajima called out that everything was ready. In her hand was a tasty and nutritious carrot. Looking around, the girl asked if the beast liked this snack. The monster happily widened its shining eyes. The girl handed him a carrot. The animal ran after the thrown treat. Rising to her feet, the student realized that now only the simplest thing remained. She looked at the squirrel. The witch furrowed her brows decisively. A glow appeared behind the animal. The beast froze in place. It waved its tail in displeasure. Frowning, the monster growled. Suddenly, something made it open its mouth in fear. The skeleton grabbed it by the skin. The huntress asked for forgiveness. Smiling, she promised that the stone would quickly grow back. The squirrel widened its eyes in horror. Tears appeared in them. The animal's cry was heard over the light forest. A loading screen appeared on the screen. Disgruntled comments appeared that their idol was late. The mascot smiled and winked. The girl apologized for being late and explained that she needed to pick up the delivery. Ghosts appeared around the logo. The girl said that there were burgers on the menu today, but she couldn't eat them. The mascot waved a bloody bat. The viewers were impatient. Smiling widely, the streamer greeted her viewers. Many enthusiastic comments appeared. Winking, Amy apologized again for being late and explained that she had important things to do today. The girl's eyes widened. She declared that she was completely ready for the broadcast. The screen said that 130,000 people were watching the stream. Raising her eyebrows, the girl decided it was time to check the rankings. Next to the first place was a photo of Adele. Looking away, the model said that her classmate, who had the ability to freeze, did not leave the first place since the first day of school. Remembering how she was walled up in a block of ice, the streamer shared a story about how she had to experience the abilities of the strongest student in the academy. Someone stepped on the white snow. Amy called her classmate the best young huntress in the whole world. Adela walked through the snowy forest. In second place was a photo of Min. Lightning thundered in the forest. It was the ability of the class president, the power of which no one can compare. Lightning sparkled in the huntress's hand. Waving her hand, she asked her partner to deal with the corpse. Smiling, Sahyun called her very strong. In front of him was a huge crayfish. In third place was a photo of the main character. The girl was surprised that a newbie could rise so high in the ranking. With her mouth open in amazement, the girl could not believe that an F rank could get third place. Yusun ran along a forest path. A giant elephant was approaching him. The model was surprised that a newbie was going to attack a third-class monster alone. The boy jumped up. He managed to knock down the monster with one blow. The streamer's eyes widened in shock, and she was confused because the F rank had just defeated a third-class monster that could withstand pain shock. A smile appeared on her face. The dust cleared around the guy. The hunter smiled, and Amy called him very handsome. She put her hand to her chin and decided that her classmate could become a real star, so it would be better to watch him. Squinting, the girl wanted to meet him at least once or even invite him to her stream. The leaderboard suddenly changed. The girl raised her eyebrows in surprise, unable to believe who was in fourth place. Blue stripes appeared on the screen. A photo of Hanajima appeared on it, and the commentators asked who she was. Frowning, the girl said that it was her classmate, who came from Japan and was always at the bottom of the rankings, with the worst grades. The hunter was sitting on the ground next to the cave. She was cooking soup on the stove. The witch sang with her hand on her chest. The model, her mouth wide open, wondered what was going on and how her classmate had managed to get fourth place. Vegetables were boiling in the soup. Hanajima closed her eyes and said that this seasoning was just perfect and remembered that carrots had helped her in a moment of danger. The sun was setting behind the forest. The spoon fell into the curry. Smiling, the girl decided to hurry up because her friend would be coming soon. Some time ago, the girl spread her arms and asked the skeleton to search for gems. Remembering how the dead man disappeared into the forest, the student thought that he was as fast as her partner. The bright sun illuminated the forest. A squirrel was lying on the ground with a ripped-out gem. The gem was lying next to a deer. The monster picked it up. The skeleton brought it closer to his eyes. The witch did not expect to get even a passing grade, but she hoped that everything would be fine. The dead man had a huge backpack on his back, filled with precious stones. The pot was covered with a lid. The protagonist smiled. Hanajima looked at him tensely. They were sitting opposite each other. The girl opened the box of rice. Under the lid was boiling curry. The girl took a ladle and scooped up the soup. The viscous gravy covered the rice. The chopsticks grabbed a piece of meat. Yusun watched the whole process carefully. Frowning, the student said that now everything was perfect. She put the meat on the gravy. Seeing this dish in front of him, the boy blushed. The witch frowned. In her hands was a plate of curry. Taking it, the guy thanked her, and his partner wished him bon appetit. In the spoon was rice covered with gravy. The hunter brought it to his mouth. He tried the dish. Hanajima looked at him carefully, waiting for a reaction. The protagonist narrowed his eyes lighting up. Yusun thought it was amazing as he continued to eat. The ingredients fell into the soup. The onion gave the curry a natural sweetness. The carrots and potatoes created a unique soft texture, and the aroma of turmeric and the rich taste of the meat blended harmoniously together. There was a piece of meat on the spoon. The boy took a bite. He closed his eyes, imagining a huge rooster, and thought that all the pieces of the puzzle fit together. He opened his eyes. Juice was flowing out of the piece of meat. This chicken was just made for curry. Putting the spoon in his mouth, the hunter realized that this dish was simply perfect. In his memory, Wanna poured powder into the pot to make curry. The girl raised her eyebrows, hoping that her friend liked it. She flinched in fear when her name was called. The protagonist handed her an empty plate. Frowning, he asked for more. The girl's mouth fell open in surprise. The girl closed her eyes and agreed to give him more food. Hearing a strange sound, the heroes turned around. The sun was setting. The system decided to announce the test scores. Someone was clutching a handkerchief. Adela was sitting in a tent. She was in first place. Someone was holding a glass in their hands. Sahyun poured more juice into it. Yuna was in second place. Sue and Renia were eating outdoors. Their friend was in third place. Hearing this, their eyes widened in surprise. Smiling happily, the guys thought that they should have expected nothing less. Hearing that Hanajima was in fourth place, the boy froze in place. His partner was shocked. The girl spilled curry past the plate. Her mouth opened in amazement. The girl screamed, her eyes widening. The lights in the night city lit up. The Hunters Association headquarters emitted a bright light. Someone was walking down the hallway. She was holding a tablet. May walked past the guards. She stopped. The girl looked up. The woman banged her fist on the door. The camera lowered. The branch manager was standing in front of the black door, and she was allowed to enter. She apologized as she opened the door. The light from the display illuminated her face. May looked up and decided to start with the report. In front of her was a man in a computer chair. The system window showed a broadcast from the island. The students clenched their fists, thinking that this was just the beginning and that they would be able to move up in the rankings. As she approached the screen, the girl realized that they were students from Gaon Academy fighting for points. Frowning, the woman was surprised that the president had decided to monitor their exam, since this rarely happened. The man grinned and said that he found one of the students very curious. The broadcast showed a student of the Fist King. Raising her eyebrows, the branch manager asked if her colleague was really interested in an F-rank representative. Hearing that he was already in third place, May looked up and called it quite an outstanding result for such a rank. There was a TV on the stand. Ranks and characteristics only matter up to a certain point. The hunters were standing next to each other. Rank can not always help to cope with some obstacles. Looking down, the girl asked if her colleague really thought that a newbie was more talented than even legendary hunters. Scratching his beard, the old man answered that it was just a guess. The president, his eyes sparkling, said that he definitely had what they had been looking for so long. A grin was shining on his face. Hanajima wiped the plate. Closing her eyes, she said that this could not be. Sitting opposite her, the protagonist explained that the place in the ranking itself does not determine anything. Taking a drink in his hands, he said that in fact, they have not achieved anything yet. Yusung lowered his head and said that they had just entered the academy, so to get into the Star 7, they would need to get even more points, and it would not be easy. Hearing this, the girl's mouth fell open in surprise. The straw pierced the drink. The boy smiled and expressed his confidence that they could do this together. The girl shuddered. A bright blush appeared on her cheeks. She beamed with joy and promised to try her best and do her best to help. Someone was watching them from behind the bushes. The stranger smirked. His partner frowned. Narrowing his eyes angrily, the brunette decided that today was a lucky day for both of them. A group of students raised their soda cans. They sat on a blanket, discussing their catch today. The gems sparkled. Looking at them, the boys were happy that there were so many of them. Pointing at himself, the blonde stated that this would definitely earn them a rank increase. His partner said that working as a team was a great solution. Hugging herself, the student said that upon their return, a dorm of a higher rank would be waiting for them. Winking, the boy confirmed that life would be more fun after this exam. With the corners of his lips lowered, someone insulted them and said that B ranks should keep quiet and not disgrace themselves. The guys widened their eyes in fear when they heard this voice. The scoundrel came out from behind the bushes. Frowning, the guy stated that teamwork does not bring any benefit. Sternly knitting his eyebrows, the student asked what they wanted. The hunter looked down at her. Pointing forward, he said that he came to take all their loot. On the ground lay a mountain of gems. Angrily opening his mouth, one of the students shouted that this was their loot. The brunette narrowed his eyes when he was asked not to act like a jackal. A dark energy appeared behind him. The boy, his eyes flashing, declared that taking what belonged to others was the right of the strong, and warned that there was no point in competing with them. The student's eyes widened in fear. The blonde looked back and asked his friend to take all the gems and run away. Ji-yeon put her hand to her chest and asked if that was really the best option. The student frowned and explained that they wouldn't be able to handle this man anyway. Summoning a weapon in his hand, he promised to hold off the villains and asked his friend to run away from here to load all the points for the gems. The girl narrowed her eyes and said that she didn't like pain. Her partner smirked and said that they would protect their treasures to the last. The gems evaporated into thin air. The girl's eyes turned red. Turning into a rabbit, she agreed to run away. Victor lowered the corners of his lips and declared that they had chosen the wrong option. Rushing forward with weapons, the boys asked him to shut up. Black wings appeared in the air. Turning into a dragon, the boy decided to show his classmates what they wanted to see so much. Flashing his red eyes, the guy said that they would find out why he was called Dark. Darkness thickened over the forest. A scream was heard. The notification announced the ranking. The crystal dissolved in the air. Looking at it, the villain said that his classmates had earned a good amount today. The girl closed her eyes. Her friend was lying on the ground. The beaten student lost consciousness. Even all their treasures did not bring Victor closer to the star 7. He frowned. His partner blew up a bubblegum ball. Watching the main character from behind the bushes, the boy was surprised that he managed to take 3rd place. Hanajima wiped her tears with a handkerchief. The guy thought that she would be absolutely harmless to them, so all that remained was to deal with the newcomer. Yusen smiled happily. The girl burst a bubblegum ball. Grinning, her partner called it a real stroke of luck. Looking at the system window, the girl decided to take the tent out of her inventory as it was already dark. Suddenly, the student shuddered. He immediately jumped up from the ground. Looking at him, the witch asked what happened. A wall of dark energy hung over them. Leaning on her hands, the necromancer noticed that the wall was made of hundreds of bats. The hunter was watching them closely. Seeing that the monsters were surrounding them, Hanajima opened her mouth in fear. A dark dome hung over the place where the heroes were. An ominous voice ordered the F-rank newbie to give him his personal computer. The girl put her hands to her chest. Grinning, Victor said that he had no way to refuse. Dragon wings appeared behind his back. The protagonist looked at him in amazement. Clenching her fists, the girl realized that they were attacked by robbers. She widened her eyes and remembered that these were people who didn't hunt monsters, but their classmates' prey. The villain looked down and realized that they were scared. His eyes lit up. Yusung smiled. He stepped forward. Raising his head, the boy said that they had no surplus to share. Blowing up the gumball again, the student thought that her friend was getting mad when weaklings talked back to him. Victor's mouth dropped open in surprise. Baring his fangs, he shouted that the newcomer was only an F rank. Sharp claws appeared on his hands. His body trembled. The young man promised to make his opponent beg for mercy and then tear him to shreds. Bats began to dart around the heroes. The boy closed his eyes. With his red eyes flashing, the villain asked why the enemy did this and shouted that it would be even better this way. The hunter was surrounded by pitch darkness. The monster dashed forward, explaining that in this form it had incredible speed and expressed a desire to rip the opponent's head off. His partner narrowed her eyes, thinking that this was the end. Suddenly, Victor froze in midair. Something hit him in the face. The protagonist's fist caught fire. He swung it, using the god style. His eyes lit up with blue fire. Yusen approached his opponent, using the Sky Dragon Rising Strike. His fist crashed into the enemy's body. A bright flash lit up the space. It was visible even from behind the bat dome. Suddenly, the dome split. Hanajima's mouth opened in horror. Beads of sweat were running down the girl's tense face. Her eyes widened in amazement. The video camera caught fire. The drone hovered over the tent camp. People were going about their business. The guys were smiling, talking to each other. Someone was standing in front of the cave. Suhyun took off his glasses. The boy wiped them with a handkerchief. Squinting, the boy realized that his plan had been flawed from the start. Lying on a lounge chair, Yuna asked him what he wanted. Smiling, the student offered her to join his team since she was the strongest in his class. The heroes were on the seashore. The girl took off her glasses. Frowning, the girl asked what kind of plan this was and stated that there were already many people on his team. Coming closer to her, Suhyun explained that it was just a precaution. Waving her hand and turning away, the huntress said that she was not interested. Looking back, Yuna noticed that her classmate was talking as if he did not need glasses. The boy's mouth opened in surprise. Smiling nervously, he asked what they were talking about. Raising her hand to her mouth, the girl reminded him that he would be expelled from the Star 7 if he failed the exam. She was sitting under an umbrella. The girl asked him why he was so angry, squinting. The boy gave her a menacing look. Lightning flashed across her hair. Smiling slyly, the huntress asked him if he really wanted to steal her glasses. The student pursed his lips in displeasure. Scratching his head, Suhyun said that they could do without her help. Yuna asked him to get her drinks, and the boy went to do so. The boy clenched his fist in irritation. He wiped his glasses with a napkin. Gritting his teeth, the student called it humiliation. Closing his eyes, the student sighed heavily. At that moment, the hunter looked down. He was holding glasses in his hands. Putting them on, Suhyun thought that this exam was all about skills. The boy looked back. People looked up at his voice. The boy spread his arms in front of his comrades and took command, declaring that he would count everyone and check for equipment before each hunting trip, so there should be no cause for concern. Clenching his fist, the student explained that they had to work together in order for their class to pass the exam with flying colors. He closed his eyes. The hunter looked up. The cave was filled with crystals. Stalactites hung from the ceiling. The red-haired girl opened her eyes and felt sick. She was lying on a pillow. Hearing a familiar voice, the girl turned her head. In front of her lay a beaten Victor. Seeing him, the tied-up stranger screamed. The scoundrel's eyes widened and she remembered everything. Some time ago, her whole body trembled. The protagonist tied up the robber with a rope. Yusun looked back. The girl could not believe that her friend was knocked out by an F-rank student. Hiding behind the bushes, the girl realized that she would never be able to defeat such a monster. She stretched out her hand, thinking that she needed to run away from here immediately. The student raised her head. A summoned skeleton appeared in front of her. Its red eyes lit up. Seeing it, the stranger began to cry. At that moment, the girl lost consciousness. Waking up in a cave, she wondered if this monster was really summoned by her classmate. Hanajima hugged her skeleton. Frowning, the villain decided to think about it with a cool head. Her body was tied with a rope. The girl thought that without her partner, his competitor was an ordinary F rank. The girl clenched her fists. Imagining the beaten witch and her summoned creature, the student decided to deal with her when no one was around. Rising from the ground, the stranger realized that this was her chance. The ropes broke at that moment. The villain picked up a piece of rope. Victor was lying next to her. Throwing the rope over her shoulder, the girl decided to retreat for a while. She shed tears and promised to take revenge on her rival. A long tunnel was visible ahead, and a strange sound was heard. The skeleton came out from around the corner. He raised his hand. Stretching it out in front of him, the dead man tried to stop the enemy. His eyes were burning. The girl grinned and said that last time he simply managed to catch her by surprise, and said that she was no longer afraid of him. She narrowed her eyes. Light appeared on the tip of her finger. Waving thin threads, the stranger decided to tear the monster apart. Bright light was reflected in the crystals. The net approached the skeleton. The monster raised its head and saw it. His face was illuminated by a bright light. The thread cut into his skull. Spreading his arms, the skeleton summoned a field of blue energy around himself. The villain widened her eyes in fear. Hearing a strange sound, the protagonist looked back. Looking into the cave, Hanajima called on the enemies to surrender in a good way. Suddenly her cheeks turned red. The dead man was holding the hostage in his arms. The girl was surprised that he managed to neutralize her alone. Victor lay motionless. The robber closed his eyes and prayed for death. The lamps were shining under the ceiling. There was a math textbook on the table. Someone was taking notes in a notebook. Seohyun looked tense. Someone called out to him. Without raising his head, the boy asked what happened. Putting her hand to her chin, his classmate said that uninvited guests had come to visit them. The boy stopped writing something on the paper. Squinting, the student thought that only the A-rank representatives knew about their plan. He put his hand on the table. The hunter came out of the tent. Raising his eyebrows, Seohyun asked where they were. The guys approached the dark forest. Opening his mouth, the boy said that 2 people were wounded and asked who the uninvited guest was. The frightened students looked at each other. The boy frowned. There were people lying on the ground in front of him. Hanajima pouted. The protagonist smiled. The skeleton gritted his teeth. The team stepped forward. Smiling, the student realized that they already knew everything. Yusun looked at him and confirmed it. A shadow loomed over Victor and his partner. Adjusting his glasses, Seohyun asked what the newcomer wanted from him and reminded him that they had a numerical advantage. A crowd of students gathered at the edge of the forest. Energy ignited in their hands. The skeleton held out his fist. The group of robbers held their weapons out in front of them, hoping that their opponent was not stupid enough to resist. Their leader's eyes sparkled. The boy watched him carefully. Hearing that the enemy was going to fight if necessary, the scoundrel raised his eyebrows in surprise. Narrowing his eyes, the hunter said that he wanted to go first. A smile appeared on his face. Hearing that the competitor wanted to enter the crystal cave, Seohyun turned pale in horror. A drop of sweat rolled down the bridge of his nose. The student could not believe that an F rank wanted to fight a crystal golem. The blonde raised her eyebrows in surprise. Her comrade opened his mouth in shock. The protagonist tilted his head. The student thought that he was crazy to do this. Someone smiled. Pointing his finger forward, the young man laughed and asked if they really thought that they would succeed. Covering her mouth with her hand, the girl said that this was too much even for a student of the Fist King. Lowering his head, the villain asked why they were listening to all this at all when they could just beat up these 3. Yusun resolutely stepped forward. The guys looked at their leader in surprise when he refused to do so. Shrugging his shoulders, Seohyun explained that there was no point in stopping them if they wanted to die. He took a step forward. Pointing to the side, the student suggested that the competitors enter the cave. The heroes looked ahead, puzzled. The student looked back and watched them go. Someone asked if this was the right decision, and the boy shuddered. Putting her hand to her chest, the blonde asked what would happen if they were able to defeat the crystal golem. The boy barely smiled and said that they would never be able to do that. Putting his hands on his hips, the villain said that they were much stronger than some disciple of a Fist King. The heroes entered the cave. Squinting, Seohyun explained that everyone had innate talent, but no one could cover up their shortcomings with it. An image of a huge unit covered in lightning appeared in his mind. The girl waved her hand and thanked the leader. Turning away, the disciple said that he still had some things to do. The guys walked forward through the cave. Blue crystals shone from the ceiling. Seeing them, Hanajima's eyes widened in delight. Continuing to walk forward, the girl realized that all the rumors were true. Smiling, the protagonist explained that this was Class A's last chance to reach the top of the rankings, and was glad that they did not have to fight to get here. The girl frowned sadly and agreed that they shouldn't waste their energy. She looked ahead. Looking down, the witch realized that no one was even trying to stop them. A memory of the student pointing and laughing at them flashed through his mind. The girl put her hands to her chest and assumed that it was because they were F rank. Without turning around, Yusun called her by her full name. Hanajima flinched in surprise. The boy lunged at her. The girl's eyes widened in confusion. The skeleton ran forward. Looking back, the boy explained that they almost fell into a trap. Frowning, he asked his friend to look ahead. Dust rose from the ground. A red eye flashed in the darkness. A huge crystal golem emerged from the depths of the cave. It would not be easy to defeat it. Many system windows appeared on the wall. Someone was watching them. The woman was holding a mug in her hands. Sahyeon adjusted his glasses. The heroes entered the crystal cave. There was no one near it. The employee looked up. Lin approached her and asked if his students had really gone into the cave alone. A monster mark appeared on the blue screen. The girl looked down and realized that he already knew what was in the center of the cave. She stirred her coffee with a spoon. Looking at her, the teacher said that there was a boss with a 4th danger level. Taking a sip, the man said that he had warned the students that it was dangerous and decided that they had to be stopped immediately. Taking a sip from the mug, the woman said that this was impossible. Lin threw up his hands and said that they could not leave things as they were. The employee just drank her coffee in silence. Taking the mug away from her mouth, she said that it was indeed dangerous. Putting the mug down on the table, the girl explained that this was the fate of a hunter. The woman narrowed her eyes and asked her colleague not to substitute in concepts, because this exam was being held for a reason and students who were unable to fit in would have already failed. The teacher frowned pitifully. Frowning, he wondered why his students had done such a thing. Looking down, the employee thought that during testing, it was no longer possible to influence the students' decisions. The crystal golem stepped forward. Seeing it, Hanajima rose on her toes. Looking back, the protagonist said that he had one request. Raising his eyebrows, he asked his friend to make sure that the skeleton had enough mana. Looking at him nervously, the girl explained that if she did, her control would weaken and the monster might do something unexpected. The eyes of the summoned creature lit up. Resolutely frowning, Yusun said that they should believe in him, because if they did not, they would not be able to call each other comrades. The girl brought her hand to her mouth. Her lips trembled. The heroes rushed forward. The witch shouted that her skeleton could use as much mana as it wanted. The golem leaned over and growled. The necromancer realized with a sad frown that the magical connection would last 10 minutes and wondered if her friends could handle it in that time. The corpse looked ahead confidently. The boss swung his hand. He aimed his fist at the enemies. Hanajima opened her mouth in fear and realized that they had to block the blow. The skeleton darted to the side. A bright flash lit up the cave. The girl covered her eyes with her hand. Opening her eye, she felt a strong pressure of wind. Suddenly, her eyes sparkled. The golem turned its head. A red gem glowed in its center. Dust rose around. The corpse frowned determinedly. His fist blocked the enemy's attack. The boy smiled. The summoned creature swung its other hand. A gust of wind swept through the cave because of his blow. The boy narrowed his eyes and shouted that they were doing great. The boss turned around. Suddenly, his body shook. Leaning over, the monster let out a battle cry. The girl thought they could do it, her brows furrowed in determination. The skeleton looked forward. The enemy's fist appeared in front of him. He managed to hold back the enemy's multiple blows. The witch's mouth dropped open in surprise, realizing that he had used some unknown skill. The skeleton's feet crashed into the ground. The corpse raised its head. The student assumed that it was her friend's power. The golem rushed forward. The summoned creature held his hand with its fist. Another explosion of bright energy was heard, and the hunter ran away. Hanajima pressed her hands to her chest. She closed her eyes and shouted that they were running out of time. The protagonist climbed up the cliff. Smiling, he praised his friend for her excellent work. Swinging his fist, Yusun shouted that this would be enough. The golem ignored him. The monster simply continued to stare ahead. Sensing the enemy's approach, the boss looked back. A flash of the battle god style, heaven-crushing strike appeared in the air. The golem's head cracked. Cracks spread across its body. Light energy oozed out from them. The monster fell to the ground. The shadow of the falling debris fell on the girl. She realized with her mouth open that they had succeeded. The boss collapsed to the ground. Seeing her partner standing on his back, the girl praised him for his excellent work. Putting her hand to her chest, the witch called out to the skeleton. The corpse gave a thumbs up. The student blushed, tears welling up in her eyes. Yusun watched them from above. He had a serious look. Hearing that it was too early to rejoice, Hanajima and her summoned creature looked at their friend. Frowning, the boy said that it was not over yet. The ground beneath his feet shook. The boy raised his head. The girl asked what it meant, her brows furrowed in fear. Hearing the strange sounds, her eyes widened. The girl looked around. The witch narrowed her eyes and asked if it was an earthquake. Hearing that it was only the first obstacle, the student looked at her comrade. The hunter looked down and declared that a real battle lay ahead. A red flash appeared in the depths of the cave. Another golem emerged from the darkness. The boys saw several new opponents in front of them at once. Hanajima, her mouth open in shock, shouted that it was the end. A crowd of monsters stopped in front of the main character. Yusen looked away and was surprised that they had all appeared at once. The skeleton frowned, having suffered significant damage in the previous clash and would not be able to withstand another one. The girl put her hands to her cheeks in horror. Imagining the bosses surrounding them, the boy realized that in this case, it would be impossible to avoid losses. There was a wall with passages behind him. The boy realized that they needed to retreat and defend themselves, repelling the attacks of the enemies. Closing his eyes, the hunter convinced himself that everything would work out. He leaned to the side and asked his friend to hide so that she would not be hit. Standing behind the summoned creature, the girl asked what would happen to her comrade. Clenching his fist, the protagonist explained that he must think strategically even in the most difficult situation, and asked his partner to trust his decision to break through to the enemy rear. The golem's red eyes shone. Opening his mouth, Yusen asked his friend to believe in him. His legs glowed. The boy rushed forward with lightning speed. The girl opened her mouth in surprise. There were traces of a rapid run on the ground. The monsters spread their arms. One of them raised his head. The boy jumped and swung his hand. His fist caught fire. Flashes appeared in the air from using a wild dragon combo. The boss's bodies were left with deep dents. The golem had lost its head. Its brethren looked at it in fear. Frowning, the hunter realized that there was one less enemy. His foot pushed off the ground. He approached the next monster. Its head immediately flew off its shoulders. In its place was a gaping hole. With a wave of his hand, the protagonist realized that 2 more enemies had been destroyed. Hanajima watched from the side. The girl's mouth dropped open in surprise, realizing that her friend had killed them with one blow, and called it incredible. Yusen jumped to the side. Squinting, the boy thought that this was strange. There were many dents on the boss's chest. For some reason, golems do not protect their heads. The monster rushed forward. It managed to get close to the enemy. The boy raised his eyebrows in amazement, realizing that the monsters were actually alive, and wondered how this could be. Frowning, he assumed that the source of their power was not in their heads. The girl extended her hand and asked him to be careful. The hunter turned around. The golems approached him from all sides. They clamped him in a vice. The witch, her eyes wide in horror, called out to her partner. The protagonist, lowering the corners of his lips, apologized for making her worry. The student began to cry from an excessive feelings. Spreading his arms out to the sides, Yusung said that he had let down his guard and thought that the source of power was in the heads of the enemies. A bright flash lit up the cave. Looking down, the boy decided to remember his teacher's lessons. He squinted. Various symbols were drawn on the board. The golems' bodies moved only due to the energy centers that were in their chests or heads. Having drawn a monster on the board, one has said that most hunters do not hit the golems on the limbs because it is best to hit the core right away. The man smirked. The old man gave a thumbs up and explained that you could also break all the golems' limbs first so they couldn't move and then hit the core. The child said he wanted to become as strong as his teacher. Sitting in the middle of the room, the Fist King said it was too early for that. Drawing a monster on the board, Wanna asked what his student would do if the core was not in the chest or head. The protagonist's mouth fell open in surprise. The man's brows furrowed slyly and explained what to do in that case. He drew something on the floor. He had a stern look. Little Yusen watched him closely. The chalk slid across the board. The boy's eyes widened and he remembered what to do. The boy jumped back. Running up to him, Hanajima asked if he was okay. The hunter said he remembered the secret of these monsters. Standing in the middle of the cave, he explained that they were just illusory doubles. Somewhere behind the rocks there was a light. There should be a core in the cave that gives power to the monsters. The bosses had their heads torn off. The protagonist looked away. The boys opened their mouths in surprise. A red fire shone in the darkness. Yusung squinted. The fire was getting brighter. The golem's core flickered among the rocks. The boy's eyes sparkled. Everything that was happening in the cave was being broadcast. Holding a mug in her hand, the academy employee decided that this was pretty good. Smiling, she realized that the student had already revealed the secret of the crystal cave. An earthquake began in the dark cave. The people outside were scared when they felt it. The girls looked up in fear. Soyeon stood in front of the cave entrance. Raising his eyebrows in amazement, the squad leader realized that the golems of the crystal cave had awakened. A red eye flashed in the darkness. Putting his hands in his pockets, the boy remembered that the scouts reported that there were 5 golems there that were simply impossible to defeat. Gritting his teeth, the scoundrel wondered if there was a way they didn't know about. Someone asked if they really wouldn't succeed. Sehun shuddered. Smiling, the girl said that the newbie had already reached the golems. Looking away, the brunette asked how this could happen. Her partner said that he didn't care. The boy adjusted his glasses and asked his comrades not to worry. The students turned their attention to him. Turning around, the boy asked them not to panic. Smiling, he asked if they really thought that an F rank could defeat a golem. Raising his hand, the scoundrel said that they had scared themselves. The guys looked at each other. They grinned and realized that this was not happening and that their classmates would most likely run away or end up in intensive care. Standing in front of the crowd of students, Sehun stated that only the S and B rank students needed to worry about the earthquake. Raising his eyebrows, the boy asked Team A to guard the approaches to the cave while reconnaissance was underway and Team B to take inventory of their equipment. The blonde frowned in worry. Someone approached the leader. Raising his head, the student asked what they should do. The glasses disappeared into thin air and the boy asked his friend to choose a couple of high-ranking students. The student summoned energy in his hand. The villain, covered in streams of water, said that he would go first. Putting his hand out in front of him, the protagonist asked his partner to retreat. Frowning, Yusung increased his concentration. His fist was covered in a light aura. He swung his fist and used the god style. A bright flash lit up the golem's head. The wild dragon's quarrying hand shot out a beam of light. The wave of energy headed straight for the core. It collided with the crystals. A powerful explosion was heard. The boy, without lowering his hand, looked forward. Smoke appeared around, dust rose into the air. The boy frowned resolutely. Suddenly, his pupils narrowed. A red warning of danger appeared in front of his hand. The system warned of an increased concentration of energy. A red flash appeared. It flared up and turned into a cloud of powerful energy. Hanajima frowned in fear. The hunter looked at his watch. Danger warnings appeared one after another. The protagonist's eyes widened tensely. Waving his hand, he asked his friend to lie down on the ground. Yusung repeated his request with his mouth wide open. The girl looked at him in horror. An explosion of red energy was heard. A deadly beam flew forward. The boy and the skeleton took a fighting stance. They had a confident look. The beam hit the ground where they were standing. The girl fell to the ground and covered her head with her hands. She looked up and sighed heavily. A skeleton stood in front of her. The summoned creature had lost its left arm. Its skull cracked. The corpse fell to the ground and crumbled into pieces. The witch reached out her hand towards it in frustration. The student looked back and called out to her friend. Looking to the side, Hanajima saw a high-level monster detection alert. A message appeared in front of her watch informing her that a 4th-grade crystal golem had appeared. The girl looked up. A huge monster loomed over her. Snow was falling outside the window. The alarm clock on the nightstand rang. The girl raised her hand. She turned off the alarm clock. The student rubbed her eyes. Stretching, the student yawned. The witch went down to the first floor. Closing her eyes, she greeted her parents. Her mother and father smiled happily and wished her good morning. Sitting at the table, the man asked his daughter to dress warmly because it was cold outside. There was a bowl of rice and other dishes on the table. The heroes wished each other a pleasant appetite. The children were brushing their teeth in the toilet. The woman asked her daughter to put on a scarf. The necromancer looked back. She tied the scarf around her neck. Her cheeks turned red. Smiling, the mother asked her to be careful. Hanajima opened the door. Smiling widely, the girl said goodbye to her family. The girl walked forward through the crunching snow. Snowflakes fell around her. Snowfall swirled over the city. Someone reached out to touch the student. Pounced on her from behind. Harumi thanked her for her help. Someone hit her on the head. Frowning, the brunette said that they should not burden their classmate. The children walked to school together, discussing the written exams and test questions, and concluded that they got good grades because they studied hard. Giving a thumbs up, the student said that their friend always helps them. Taking off her hospital mask, the schoolgirl confirmed this. The girls walked forward and left. Walking down the school corridor, they agreed to go to a store that sold delicious matcha cakes. The witch smiled. Suddenly, Isshin bumped into her. The boy narrowed his eyes menacingly. The necromancer widened her eyes in fear. The boy smirked. Raising his eyebrows, he asked if his classmate was scared and said that she did well on the practical exam. Hanajima blushed with embarrassment. Isshin left. Without turning around, the boy asked his classmate to continue in the same spirit. Open-mouthed in shock, Harumi was surprised that he could praise others. The girl shyly lowered her eyes. The class number was written on the wall. Putting his hands on the table, the teacher announced that their student took 20th place in the F-class ranking. The students opened their mouths in surprise because this happened for the first time in the history of the school. The man smiled and congratulated the girl. She opened her mouth in surprise. Putting her hands together, the student was happy for her classmate. The guy raised his eyebrows and called it an amazing event. The witch scratched her head in embarrassment. The trust of those around her gradually improved her internal state. There was a tray with food on the table. Harumi, widening her eyes, called her friend the pride of the class. The necromancer said that she was just lucky this time. People surrounded her desk, happy for her. Holding chopsticks in her hands, the student asked her friend not to overdo it. Closing her eyes, the student said that at this rate she would be accepted into Gaon Academy. Looking down, Hanajima thought she had become too selfish. A snowstorm had begun outside. Adjusting his collar, the old man warned that hunters were always on the verge of death. A crowd of students stood before him. Raising his hand, the teacher asked them to stop if they felt they couldn't handle it, because that was considered bravery. Smiling, the man asked them to remember that the most important thing was safety. The boys smiled. The girl furrowed her brows determinedly when she heard that hunters would become protectors not only of their country, but of all of humanity. Lowering his head, the old man wanted to tell them what to do if they ran out of mana. Suddenly, he fell silent and looked up. The students looked at him and smiled. The teacher's mouth opened in surprise. Closing his eyes and sighing, the man noticed the sincere joy on their faces. The doors of the dungeon for level 5 hunters opened. The dog emitted a bright glow. Standing in front of the burning rift, the old man allowed the boys to enter the portal. The students went forward. A bright light burst out from behind the doors. The girl looked forward confidently. Her cheeks turned red. Suddenly, someone approached her from behind. The student put her hand on her shoulder. The friend smiled happily. The necromancer smiled back. They went into the portal together. The sword cut through the monster's body. The students found themselves in a cave. A notification informed them that the first floor had been successfully cleared and that after a 10-minute break they could continue to the next area. Closing their eyes, the boys declared that it was too hard. Sitting on the floor, they were surprised that the exam was so difficult. Biting on the straw from his juice, the boy decided that this was to be expected. Smiling, his companion decided that they needed to give it their all. Looking around, the brunette remembered that there were necromancers among them. Next to Hanajima stood a skeleton. Looking down, the girl realized that her mana was almost depleted. A weak aura flickered around her hand. Her lips trembled. Approaching her, the student handed her a mana potion. Passing it to her classmate, she thanked her. Closing her eyes, the brunette said that they all relied on her a lot. The girl's eyes widened in surprise. Amain turned around when she was asked to pass another potion. The witch watched her comrades. The students were smiling, they were very excited. Raising her eyebrows, the necromancer realized that everyone was counting on her. She looked down. Looking at the mana potion, Hanajima realized that they would all die if something went wrong. A fire flared up in the memory. The guy extended his hand forward. The monster attacked the guys. The girl wondered what prompted her to become a hunter. Her friends smiled. A crowd of zombies approached them. Jumping to their feet, the students prepared for battle. The living dead opened their mouths. The girl realized that she liked making an effort to receive praise. A huge monster attacked the students. A broken skull lay on the ground. The witch frowned in fear. She put her hands forward. The necromancer closed her eyes and began to cry. Her friend was too close to the zombie. Hanajima opened her mouth wide and screamed. Harumi tried to run to her. She looked scared. Tears were dripping onto the girl's lap. She narrowed her eyes. The girl looked up. A bright light illuminated her face. The giant golem was preparing to fire another shot. Its eye lit up. The student opened her mouth. Sharp blades rose into the air. The witch looked at them with a detached expression. They surrounded her from all sides. Suddenly, the protagonist jumped forward and repelled the boss's attack. Looking back, Yusen asked if his friend was okay. Putting her hands on her knees, the necromancer said that it was impossible from the beginning. Lowering her head, Hanajima said that she did not have enough strength even at such a crucial moment. The broken skeleton lay on the ground. The boy frowned in disappointment and called out to his partner. Raising her head, the girl apologized to him. Tears were streaming down her cheeks. Smiling nervously, the girl suggested giving up. Hanajima sat on her knees and asked the protagonist if he had asked her why she had entered Gaon. She answered with a smile through her tears that she thought she had done so because she wanted to change. Descending into her memories, she added that if she thought about it, she simply wanted to run away. She often sat by the window all alone. Running away was much easier than facing her mistakes. She realized that the fun at the academy, the effort, the new friends, it was too happy a life for someone like her. But now she had woken up. No matter where she ran, the outcome would not change. Leaving her memories, Hanajima clutched her skirt in her hands and added, because she was a terrible coward. Lowering her gaze, she quietly said that perhaps the protagonist had experienced something even worse. After that, she asked if she was pathetic. It wasn't, Yusung suddenly answered firmly. As soon as the girl heard this, she was very surprised. After a short pause, she sadly closed her eyes and said, "Such consolations." The protagonist interrupted and calmly said that he was not consoling her. He looked at the girl and said that he simply could not agree with her words. The guy began to remind her of the good moments, saying that he was a hardworking person who wants to change. He sat down on the damp floor and added, "The one who does not give up until the very end." He thinks Hanajima is pathetic. Hearing this, the girl was surprised and looked towards the protagonist. Yusung stepped towards Hanajima and said that he wanted strength. The girl sadly lowered her head. Stopping in front of her, the protagonist said not to mock others. Looking at the girl, he said that the reason why he was able to get up again. Hanajima looked up in surprise at Yusung, who continued to speak, not because he was strong. He did it because of one person. The boy remembered himself when he was very young. He did it for the teacher who believed in him. He remembered his teacher Manhwa. Leaving the memories, he said that if she wanted to give up, she could rest. Hanajima's face was covered in tears. The boy looked at the upset girl and added that she had done enough. He said that it was not her fault. Yusung immediately extended his hand forward. The boy extended it towards Hanajima, who was sitting on the ground. The girl looked forward in confusion. She pursed her lips and tears welled up in her eyes. The girl extended her hand forward in response. The protagonist said if she wanted to change, when suddenly Hanajima's eyes widened in horror. She hesitantly pulled her hand back, moving it back. The words that they would believe in her and always rely on her immediately began to sound in the girl's head. The voice in her head was screaming that it was all her fault. The screams that everyone relied on the girl were repeated in her head. The thoughts that it was all her fault were repeated in her head. The girl was immediately called out loudly by a voice behind her. Her mother was holding the girl's hand and asking if she was okay. If suddenly, the woman added. She looked at her daughter and said that it was hard for her and she was forcing herself. The mother looked at the girl with a smile on her face. Hanajima lowered her head down and covered her face with her hair. The girl said that she immediately took her mother's hands. With a wide smile on her face, she continued, she wants to become a hunter. Hanajima closed her eyes with tears in her eyes. Frightened, she stretched out her hand forward. The girl and the protagonist grabbed each other's hands. Yusung called Hanajima with a smile on his face. The guy was happy. A magical flow of mana appeared behind him and he added that this partner is Hanajima. A bright glow of magic immediately appeared in the air. A strong stream of magic ball flew forward. It was moving forward rapidly. After some time, smoke from the impact appeared to the side. The guy's hand was pointing down. There was a drawing of a dragon on his cloak. The protagonist quickly looked forward. He closed his eyes and said, martial god style, first awakening. Yusung opened his eyes wide, burning with magic, and looked forward. The spirit of the black dragon, he firmly added. At this time, fast food was on the table. There were messages in the chat that it became completely boring towards morning. There were 60,000 viewers on the broadcast at 12:30 o'clock. Is there really nothing interesting going to happen? They asked in the chat. Is it normal to fall asleep during a broadcast? A person was sitting in front of the monitor. It was Amy. She was sleeping soundly. Suddenly, a loud sound and a notification appeared with the inscription, alarm. This scared the girl and she fell out of her chair with a scream. Having gotten up, she asked discontentedly what happened. The notification that appeared said that a raid on the main boss of the Crystal Cave had begun. After reading this, Amy's eyes lit up and she exclaimed, is this really an attack on the boss? Without thinking twice, she opened an energy drink. Taking hold of the mouse, she smiled widely and said that they were faster than she thought. She looked at the powerful creature and said that it was probably O or even S-class. The chat asked if it was true that this was a group raid. Amy's device was in that cave. Of course, another chat user answered, asking later if he was really going to kill the boss alone. When it's really boring, you can do it alone, the chatter answered. Reading the chat, the streamer smiled contentedly and said that she really wanted to watch. Pressing the mouse keys, she said who would be today's hero who challenged the boss. Her device smiled. It showed the protagonist and Hanajima. The girl's face was clearly excited. Yusung was enveloped in a powerful magical aura. Hanajima looked at the guy and said in surprise that mana. It was gathering around Yusung. The protagonist's power was growing. Suddenly, he stopped and said that his black dragon robe was very greedy. He looked forward with burning eyes and said that he would take not only his mana, but also everything that was around. The guy tightly clenched his hand into a fist and added, and in the end, transform it into his own power. Standing in a stance, Yusung said, Black Dragon Spirit. Enormous power began to gather around his hand, and he said, increasing concentration. With burning eyes, Yusung quickly looked forward, talking about the style of the fighting god. The guy suddenly clenched his hand into a fist with all his strength. He activated the crushing blade of the black dragon. The protagonist stretched his hand forward, releasing the blade. The mana quickly flew forward at the attackers and their red ball. A huge wall immediately appeared in front of the blade. The mana crashed into it with great force. The wall immediately began to crack from the strong blow. Hanajima clenched her hand into a fist and screamed that the golem was going to absorb the mana again. Yusung replied that he had a limit, because no matter how greedy he was, one day the vessel would still not withstand it. The black dragon blade began to release black magic from itself. The golem looked forward in confusion. This applies to the golem too, the guy added, looking at the blade. He released mana upward, striking the golem. The boss flew to the side in horror, trying to dodge the blow. The main character said that it could be difficult alone, looking at the surprised Hanajima. The guy immediately added that there were two of them. With a sly smile, he asked if the girl was ready. The guy looked at the frightened Hanajima. She thought she felt. The girl clenched her fist in confusion. Hanajima thought she could feel Yusung's mana as well as his determination. The girl thought she had done enough. Her body began to be enveloped in mana while she thought that it was not her fault, and therefore, the girl's eyes lit up and she firmly thought that she did not want to give up. A bright light appeared in the skeleton's chest. Hanajima frowned and immediately activated the Black Dragon's spirit mimicry. A powerful stream of magical energy burst out from the golem's eye. Hanajima's skeleton rushed to attack. The girl, with her arms outstretched, begged for the skeleton. Suddenly, a powerful magical energy appeared around the skeleton. It abruptly stopped and released it in the form of a powerful stream towards the boss. It quickly reached the golem's eye. Hanajima gave it her all. The skeleton's eyes were burning. Its terrifying stream of magic flew into the eye from its blind spot. It flew right next to it, slightly splitting it. The protagonist stood with his hand outstretched, controlling his power. The golem's eye was enveloped in strong magic again. He looked at Yusung and screamed loudly. The stones on the ground began to shake. The walls also shook. Everyone present felt it and tensed up. The stalactites on the ceiling began to shake. Suddenly, a cracking sound was heard. The protagonist immediately understood everything. Without thinking twice, he used the martial god style. The skeleton's eyes lit up. Yusung then used the Black Dragon rotation technique. This power became stronger with each passing second. At this time, a girl was watching them and talking about his clothes. A man stood next to her and said that this artifact was used by the Fist King in the past. Artifacts are usually divided into 4 classes: common, rare, unique, and legendary. But sometimes, even rarer artifacts can be found among them. A special artifact that exists in a single copy, they are called epic. Created using ancient technology that cannot be repeated, ancient. And finally, artifacts created from materials of another dimension. They are called arcana. The girl looked at the protagonist and said that he had an arcana class artifact. Black Dragon Robe. An extremely precious artifact that, due to the crazy absorption of the owner's mana, was never able to find an owner. The guy squinted and did not understand how one could use such an artifact so freely. One has stood behind Yusung with a sly smile. Achromatic colors. Among all the colors of this spectrum, black means calm. The protagonist closed his eyes. Black has brightness. Hanajima stretched her hands forward, releasing mana, but it has no shades and saturation. The skeleton with a fist menacingly ran forward. At first glance, it may seem that it is not painted but some color. The golem immediately released a bright beam of mana forward. But Yusung thinks differently. He tried to accept this color without rejecting anything. Strong mana came out of the guy's eye, so it can be said that it is pure. The golem quickly moved forward. It was approaching Yusung, who thought that it was a very warm color. The monster with glowing eyes growled menacingly. He immediately pointed his fist forward and shouted loudly. A strong blow quickly rushed forward. The guys with fists looked up menacingly. Yusung extended his hand with mana forward. Infinity. The guy confidently looked at the monster. He activated the fighting god style and leaned his hand against the golem. He immediately used the Black Moon. The monster's stone body began to collapse. The golem soared up above the protagonist. Its body began to sparkle with sparks. The monster began to quickly move back. The stone body continued to remain in place while the protagonist extended his hand upward. The guys were being monitored through a camera in the sky. Emmy was eating snacks and carefully watching what was happening. Hanajima, with tears in her eyes, looked up anxiously. The village chief looked forward with interest, holding the remote control in his hands. Wanda scratched his beard with a smile on his face. Sahyun clenched his fist and looked down in fear. Lane and the girl looked up. The system window said that the cleanup was complete. The boss was a giant stone golem. Silence reigned in the cave. The protagonist held the eye of the defeated golem in his hand. Hanajima looked at the eye in surprise and said, "This is it." The golem's core, the protagonist answered. The core suddenly began to change. A system window appeared in front of the guys, informing them that they had received the core of the giant stone golem. The next notification said that they had also received 900 experience points. 900, Hanajima asked in shock, raising her hands to her mouth. The protagonist smiled and said that this was enough to take a place in the Star 7. Suddenly, they were called out from behind. The guys turned around in surprise. 3 guys were walking towards them, and one of them said that it was only worth talking about if they could get out of here. Suhan said with a displeased face that they surprised him, adding that he didn't think they could handle it. The 2 guys along with him said that this was why they decided to change strategy and capture them instead of the golem. Hearing this, Hanajima put her hand to her chest and exclaimed that this was not what they agreed on. Suhan's eyes lit up, and he angrily said that he simply told them to attack the golem first. Water began to gather around him. It slowly turned into a wall of water in front of him, and he said that this was not a warning. The water quickly took the form of a dragon. A threat, the guy finished at that moment when a water hydra appeared behind him. After a short pause, he waved his hand. He shouted loudly, ordering them to give him the core, and the hydra rushed to attack. The eyes of the skeleton Hanajima immediately lit up. He charged and parried the hydra's attack, but suddenly his arm cracked. Seeing this, Sahyun said that it was all useless. Formless water rushed towards the skeleton. Then it began to fill it quickly. The next second, the undead were suddenly torn apart. Seeing this, Hanajima said sadly, in one hit. Sahyun's subordinates used their magic and said that the guys used up all their mana on the golem, so it was better for them to calmly surrender. Hanajima looked down in frustration and thought that she did not have enough mana to use another skill, then anxiously grabbed her throat. With tears in her eyes, she turned to Yusung. The protagonist looked up with a malicious smile. He said that the points were already enough so they could go. Sahyun laughed and menacingly asked if they were really planning to run away. He asked if they were really thinking. A magic seal appeared in the air and he added, asking if he was not prepared for this. The girl turned to the side in fear and remembered about the passage. Yusung smiled and said that everything was fine. The guy immediately took the girl's hand. The protagonist added that they would leave, to which Hanajima exclaimed in surprise. The guy hugged her and said, "In the sky." Sahyun got angry and shouted loudly, asking what nonsense. The guy stretched his hand forward and activated a water vortex. His mana moved forward rapidly. Sahyun shouted loudly that the guys were forbidden here. The vortex was quickly approaching them, moving quickly downwards. Yusung and Hanajima abruptly jumped to the side and Sahyun shouted, asking if they had really dodged. The protagonist held the girl in his arms and asked if she was ready. The boy asked her to hold on tightly with his eyes shining. They immediately flew up while the opponents were watching them. No, Suhyun shouted loudly. He bit his lip and thought if he let them go, he wouldn't be able to keep his place in the Star 7. The boys immediately started shouting loudly that they let them go. The boy frowned and asked what Suhyun was going to do. The boy angrily released a water vortex at him and ordered him to shut up. Gritting his teeth, he thought about Yusung. He thought that the protagonist was just an F-class trash. The girl slowly opened her eyes. In front of her, she saw a dark sky. In surprise, she opened her eyes wide and said, "Wow." Suddenly, Hanajima understood everything. She grabbed the protagonist tightly and shouted for him to stop. They were high in the sky where the girl screamed, asking if they were really flying. The protagonist slowly descended. His foot gently touched the sky. Then he put Hanajima down and told her to be careful. When the girl stood up, the guy said now. Hanajima looked up at her savior with tears in her eyes. Pulling her hand, the protagonist said, "It's time to go." He led her along it, leaving footprints behind him. There was a satisfied smile on his face, and the girl's face was worried about the height. Turning around, the guy said that if the girl let go of him, they would fall, then asked if she could fly. Hanajima was very scared and exclaimed, "No." Yusung looked around and asked if he had jumped too high. The girl looked down and said that the island seemed so small. "Yes," the protagonist answered with a smile on his face, adding that everything would be over when they landed on the ground. Hearing this, Hanajima looked at the guy sadly. After a short pause, she lowered her head and said that he was right, an exam. Leading the girl along, the protagonist said that she tried hard. Hanajima smiled and said to herself, "Exactly." She carefully stepped forward. Closing her eyes, she said to herself when the exam will be over. She again. Suddenly, her leg slipped. Her hand slipped from the protagonist's hand. The protagonist immediately turned around. Hanajima fell down and screamed loudly. She tried to scream for help with tears in her eyes. As she fell down, she suddenly screamed, begging him to save her. The girl immediately narrowed her eyes. The protagonist called out to her with a sly smile. Hanajima immediately opened her eyes in surprise. The guy was stretching out his hand towards her. Yusung grabbed her hands when suddenly the girl blushed with embarrassment. Holding hands, they quickly flew down. The protagonist looked at the girl and asked if it wasn't fun. Hanajima immediately calmed down and looked at the guy. She smiled and replied that it was fun. The girl remembered all the moments spent with the guy and said, very cheerfully, so much so that she does not want it to end like this. She added shyly that she is thinking about it now. Yusung continued to look into her eyes and asked if she does not like the word end. Hanajima continued to smile and asked him. They looked at each other shyly. The protagonist looked at the sunset and answered, "Maybe so, because tomorrow is foggy." The guy looked at the guys watching them and said, he does not know if he will be happy. Looking at the couple, he added, or disappointed. Yusung looked at the happy guys and said, maybe he will be happy. He looked at Adela, adding, or will be sad. After a while, they landed on the ground. The protagonist looked at Hanajima, touched by his words, and added that he likes the end. Yusung put his hand on her head. The guy added that they can cherish the past day. He carefully adjusted the girl's hair. The protagonist bent down lower and said, and at the same time they can start over. The exam organizer immediately said that the exam was over. A few seconds later, He said that the rankings had been determined. The system window showed that Yusung was in first place, Hanajima in second, and Adela in third. Emi opened her eyes wide and asked in shock if Hanajima had really beaten Adela. The man exclaimed in horror if Yusung was in first place. The boys looked at the screen and were surprised by Yusung and Hanajima. They asked in shock if they were in the top 3. Yusung's photo appeared on the screen. The class monitor leaned her head on her hand. She immediately pressed the button on the remote control. With an evil smile, she said that this inferior person seemed to have become arrogant. Some time passed. There were 6 people standing in the stands of Gaon Academy, headed by the director. He said that this day would be a day of pride for the students of his academy. Raising his fist, he proudly said that their students got excellent grades in this exam, once again making the name of Gaon famous. There were many students in the hall. Behind the principal, there were outstanding students, as he said that all the glory of their academy was made up of the talent and abilities of the students. And of course, among all of them, the most honorable place was. There was a wide smile on the boy's face. There was no emotion on Adela's face. The Star family, the principal said loudly. The faces of the 7 members had different emotions. The principal turned around and said that they should be congratulated with applause. He extended his hand to the side and called the 2 to him. Yusun and Hanajima, the principal said loudly. Immediately after these words, a bright light fell on the stage and illuminated the protagonist and his girlfriend. The principal pointed at the boys and said that this was an unprecedented event in the history of the academy. The students of Class F entered the Star 7, so he hoped that they would become an example for the others. Siu happily applauded. Yuna was standing on the stage with a very unhappy face. Hearing the sound, she looked in his direction. Suddenly, a sarcastic smile appeared on her face. She saw a dissatisfied Sehyun. Looking at him, she mockingly asked what was wrong with his face. Some time passed. There were many people in the school corridor. One of them was Sehyun. He heard a sarcastic voice of a girl who was asking who they had here. Yuna was standing not far from him. She raised her hand to her mouth and asked in surprise if it was Sehyun from the 7. Suddenly, she mockingly said that she remembered that he was expelled. This made the guy very angry. Yuna began to mock the guy, saying that she was so stupid to forget. After saying this, she stuck out her tongue and looked at the guy. Contempt suddenly appeared in her eyes, with which she asked if he was really not going to say anything at all. Suhan bit his lip and replied that he was just unlucky. Hearing this, the girl laughed and asked if he was unlucky. She also said that she never thought that she would hear such words from him. The guy clenched his hand into a fist in anger. Through clenched teeth, he asked what she wanted to hear then. The girl put her hand to her chin and thought. He raised his head and asked that he lost because he was not good enough. Not enough ability or talent. Without turning around to look at the interlocutor, he firmly said that even though he briefly lost his status, nothing changed. As he left, he firmly said that this was his place. Yuna smiled sarcastically, looking after the guy. She immediately raised her hand up, shouting for Suhan to return it quickly, because there should be 2 people from Class A in the 7. The guy quickly walked forward in displeasure. He immediately frowned. Suhan started to recall the moment Yusun came on stage. People started whispering in surprise. The man asked if the boy had been kicked out of the 7. He immediately put out his cigarette. The man looked up, saying that he was giving Suhan 3 days. The boy narrowed his eyes in fear. He immediately looked down at his wrist. Looking at his watch, he read that his request had been accepted. Suhan looked down, thinking that he would return it. He thought that the protagonist was just using his teacher's fame. With a smirk on his face, he thought that the boy was just a worthless F rank. On the watch, he read that the student council president had been approved, and the observer was Haeun. The system window showed that the competition for a place in the Star 7 had been approved. The guys heard with interest that the competition for a place in the Star 7 would begin in 30 minutes. On the screen, they read that the defender was Yusung in 7th place, and the challenger was Sehyun in 8th place. Sehyun clasped his hands to his chest, thinking that it would be better to prepare in advance while the transfer of the artifact was completed. He slowly walked forward, thinking that he would give it his all just in case. The people happily ran forward. Lee Hyuk looked out the window, saying that the classmates were very impatient this time because the exam had just ended and already the battle for the rank. The girl smiled and realized that the guy seemed unable to accept the fact that he entered the 7 as an F rank. The class rep leaned her head on her hand, thoughtfully looking forward. She was looking at the screen with Yusung's photo. Her gaze was quickly directed forward. The class rep looked at the guys and turned to them. With a smile, she asked who they thought would win. Lee Hyuk frowned, looking forward. He thoughtfully replied that it would be Sehyun because he was smart and had good skills. The girl nodded and added that Yusung was just lucky. She added that Suhan would never go into a fight that he knew he would lose. The class rep smiled sarcastically. "Do you think?" she asked. The arena. Amy's device was flying above it. The girl was shouting loudly through it, Breaking news. With shining eyes, she said that this was the first rank battle this year. Viewers in the chat wrote that Amy was so excited. Someone asked if they were really so eager to compete for rank. The streamer waved her hands and said that a rank battle right after the exam was very unusual. She also said that Soohyun from class A was very assertive. She heard that this time, the right to participate in the International NHAT Hunter Academy competition would be at stake. Hearing this, the guys wrote in the chat asking if even after the fight, the former member of the Seven still had the right to participate in the NHAT. The girl from the stands looked at the arena and said that it seemed like being kicked out of the Seven had really hurt him. The guy next to him said that it was understandable. After all, he was kicked out because of 2 F-class students. The guys who were also expecting the fight asked if everything would be okay. Adela looked at the arena and said that the guy was a student of the King of Fist fighting. There was interest in her eyes. She suddenly remembered how her father gave her a teddy bear. But after a while, only pieces remained of it. Leaving her memories, the girl put her hand to her head. Suddenly, she heard a voice from the side asking if she had also come to watch. It was Yuna. She spread her hand and sarcastically asked why. Adela looked at the girl and said that she was here too. Yuna and her friend stepped towards the girl and said that they were classmates, which is why they decided to come. Suddenly, a voice came from the speakers announcing that the battle for a place in the Seven would soon begin. After that, it asked the participants to go to the court. The guy's legs came out of the darkness. It was the protagonist. He remembered Siu, who held out 2 fingers and said that in Gaon there were only 2 possible outcomes of the battle. Holding out his index finger, he said that the first was for the protagonist to destroy the enemy. After saying this, he tightly clenched his hand into a fist. After that, he added, or he would destroy the protagonist. Leaving the memories, Yusung looked at his hand, in which lay the bandage. There was sadness in his eyes. Immersing himself in the memories, he closed his eyes. He remembered the voice that asked him, well. The girl asked how it was to be born defective. With a malicious smile, she asked if the guy suffered because of it. She whispered with a crazy smile for Yusung to answer her quickly. The protagonist tied his hair into a ponytail. The guy walked forward quickly. He frowned, thinking about that place in Gaon. As he walked onto the stage, he looked up, thinking about where the older sister ruled like a king. The lanterns illuminated him, while the organizer shouted about the battle for a place in the Star 7. He shouted that Yusung was coming out to defend his rank. The protagonist immediately turned to the side, stopping in place. He noticed a silhouette illuminated on the balcony. The class monitor was standing at the top, looking down with a sly smile. The guy immediately smiled. He thought that his sister should wait. Yusung began to carefully climb the stairs. The guy thought that he would soon go up to the girl. He appeared. A voice was heard in front of him. Soohyun stood in front of him with a smile. With a smile, he said that he thought that the protagonist would run away. Yusung firmly answered that he must defend his rank. The organizer said that the players were already on the field, so the battle for a place in the Star 7 began. The boys immediately frowned when they heard the countdown begin. Byung Chul and Yuhana immediately began counting. Soohyun adjusted his shirt, saying that this was fine too. He activated the water vortex, adding that the protagonist had nowhere to run now. 2, the host said, while Hanajima clenched her fists in alarm. Yusung extended his hand forward. He immediately took a stance, frowning and looking forward. Soohyun quickly looked forward. 1, the host said, when suddenly Yusung's eyes glowed with mana. The protagonist immediately thought about it. He looked at Hanajima, thinking that there were only 2 possible outcomes in Gaon. The boy knew that he would destroy the enemy. Yuna looked at Adela with a malicious look. The chief added with a burning gaze, or Soohyun would destroy him. Traits. These are hidden, destructive power, precision and safety, and rarity. The fate of hunters is determined by a list of traits determined by the Hunter Association. This is the inevitable reality that everyone who becomes a hunter faces. Of course, there are those in the world who, even with an S rank, are actually inferior to an A rank, and A rank hunters whose strength is equal to the S rank. However, all the hunters of the village level were S rank, and among the hunters of the 6th level, everyone was equal to the A rank. After attacking the protagonist, Soohyun thought that the result was already decided. He understood that strength is not determined only by evaluation. His water rushed towards the enemy in powerful streams. Shortening the distance, it enveloped him. But unexpectedly, the protagonist dispelled it. There was not a drop of fear in his eyes. Seeing this, Yuhana exclaimed in surprise, asking what was happening. She shouted that it was a high-speed attack, but Yusung reflected it. The protagonist rushed to attack. He parried blow after blow, slowly approaching his opponent. Watching this, Lin was very tense. The protagonist parried the blows and stared at his opponent. Soohyun had a sly smile on his face and a mocking look in his eyes. Yusung punched through the thick water with one punch of his fist. The water scattered into small drops in all directions. Yuna, watching the fight, with a smirk on her face, said that the protagonist was doing well, and then asked if it was really because he was a disciple of the king of fist fighting. However, the water poured onto the floor, leaving small puddles. The girl, with a sly look in her eyes, quietly said that Sehyun could not be defeated just by parrying the attacks. The water from these small puddles began to rise. Suddenly, it formed into streams of water and rushed at the protagonist from all sides. Yusung felt this and turned around abruptly. Hanajima was shouting at him from the stands to be careful. The protagonist smoothly raised his hand and used the martial god style, Black Dragon Spirit. At that moment, his aura became several times stronger, enveloping him. The people in the stands were shocked. They asked each other if this was really F rank. A wide smile appeared on Suhyun's face, and he mockingly asked if his opponent was still struggling. But Suhyun extended his hand forward with a magic attack again. With a burning gaze, he asked how much longer the opponent could hold out. Hanajima opened her mouth wide, exclaiming in horror. She said that because of Suhyun's water attacks, the entire arena was in water, which meant that the longer the fight went on, the stronger his water dragons became, and in addition, the longer their battle dragged on, the more restrictions on Yusung's movement and skills appeared. The girl added in frustration that his mana was quickly depleted, when suddenly the boys exclaimed in fear. She watched the battle, saying that at this rate, Yusung. Suhyun said with a smirk on his face, "That's the end." A large stream of water mana immediately shot forward. "No," the protagonist replied with a smile on his face. "Distract yourself," he added, with glowing eyes. The guy immediately frowned and swung his arm menacingly. He rushed forward using the martial god style. Yusung soared upward, activating the Black Dragon Crescent Step. The guy released magic forward, attacking the enemy. The hosts shouted that they could not believe what they were seeing with their own eyes because the arena was shaking due to the power of mana. They asked Suhyun to be careful, seeing the attack approaching him. The ring on Suhyun's finger glowed and he ordered to sweep everything away. He immediately activated Laja. The guy swung his hand forward, releasing a water vortex to attack the protagonist. Yusung covered his body with his hand, stepping back. The girl looked at the arena in confusion. "The ring of Laja?" she asked, looking at Sehyun. "The ring has a unique artifact rank." Amy screamed in shock when she saw the unique artifact. Lin clenched his fist and asked if they should stop the guys. This was too much. Sehyun raised his head and laughed maliciously. He looked around and asked to wait. The girl took Lin's arm and said that for hunters, such fights are also practice, so it's okay. Sehyun spread his arms and asked Yusung to watch. A barrier appeared behind the protagonist and the guy screamed that no matter what he did, there was a limit that he would never cross. He added that the limit was F rank. A huge amount of mana appeared behind him and with a smile he said that it was time for Yusung to give up. There is a huge blue hole on the coast of Belize. The place inside it was called the Pillar of Light. The name has nothing to do with the sea ghosts that are talked about on every coast. It reflects the horrors that actually happened. We are talking about Laja, and she stood behind Sehyun. Suddenly, she released a terrifying stream of magical energy from her mouth. The protagonist did not lose his composure and swung. The next second, he forcefully punched the air using Black Dragon Heavy Crushing Punch. He released a terrifying force from his fist. Two incredibly strong streams of power collided. The host shouted that the participants were competing in mana power. Laja's power was pressing on the protagonist's powerful energy. Suddenly, a bright light illuminated Yusung's face. He saw a bright flash in front of him. Laja's power broke through the protagonist's power. The audience screamed in shock that Sehyun had broken through. The protagonist suddenly jumped out of the thick smoke. Looking down, he thought that Laja had definitely been smashed by his teacher. This was a monster of the 5th rank, Sea Dragon Laja. Suddenly, water dragons attacked him from the smoke. Yusung repelled each attack and said in his head that the water began to move faster than before. Sehyun, with his hand outstretched, mockingly asked where his strength had gone. Had he really given up? The protagonist looked at his opponent and understood that a protracted fight would only harm him. With these thoughts, he sat down. He understood that there was no choice, so he would have to move forward. As soon as he thought about this, he immediately jumped up. The smile disappeared from Sehyun's face, and he asked displeasedly, did he still not want to admit defeat? He used the water meat grinder technique, after which the water furiously rushed towards Yusung. But not even a drop of fear appeared in the eyes of the protagonist. Using the Black Dragon Shadow technique, he dodged each stream of water. Seeing this, Sehyun waved his hand and shouted furiously, using Laja. But before the dragon could attack, he was cut by a powerful magical blow from his opponent. Sehyun was shocked. The protagonist immediately soared above the boy and activated the martial god style. He used the Black Moon, getting closer and closer to the enemy. Yusung swung and used the final blow, shattering the sky. Yuna coldly looked down and asked if this was the end. Seohyun said with a malicious smile on his face, "What a pity." The protagonist punched the protective barrier. Seohyun formed a defense around himself, shouting, "Checkmate." Mana suddenly glowed brightly in the air. The magic beam quickly flew forward. Seohyun looked at the smoke from the blow and loudly asked if Yusung still didn't understand. He was talking about the boy's loss, who at that time was clenching his fist in anger. Seohyun added with glee that it was decided even before the protagonist entered the arena. Yusung squatted down, resting his fist on the floor. The boy extended his hand with Mana forward and ordered to surrender, when suddenly the protagonist replied that Seohyun seemed comfortable here. "What?" the guy asked, confused. Yusung suddenly rose from his knees, lifting himself off the floor. The guy began to slowly walk forward, saying that the opponent believed that everything was already decided. "Is that so?" he asked, looking up. He looked at the confused Seohyun, saying, "Then he." The protagonist took a stance and added, "Lost before entering the arena?" He shouted menacingly. Seohyun's eyes were full of bewilderment and he asked again, "What?" His face suddenly turned red with anger and he asked what kind of nonsense. The guy asked if Yusung had really gone crazy because his Lagia. Seohyun suddenly raised his hand forward, releasing an attack. The guy raised his head up and frowned in confusion. The protagonist menacingly said that he was right. The guy added that not all efforts bring results. He looked around the crowd and said that everyone has a limit. Yusung said that everyone can give up, while Hanajima listened to him with tears in her eyes. A magical silhouette suddenly appeared in front of the enraged Seohyun. The guy stretched out his hand forward, shouting that this couldn't be happening. He was very angry and menacingly asked how Yusung was even allowed into F class. The protagonist did not let him finish speaking when he suddenly punched his opponent in the stomach with all his might. Seohyun opened his mouth in severe pain, when suddenly the barrier was destroyed. With a smirk on his face, Yusung said that everyone has a choice. The guy stood over the enemy's body and said, "No matter what, everyone decides for themselves." From under his brows, he sharply directed his gaze forward. A female voice was heard from the balcony, saying that the guy cannot judge himself by the standards of others. The girl smiled slightly and laughed. She put her hand to her chin and added that he spoke as if he wanted her to hear. The results quickly appeared on the screen, indicating that Seohyun had lost. The host said that Yusung, who took third place in the rankings, won. Emmy adjusted her glasses and remembered that the protagonist had bet a pass to the international competition of hunter academies. The girl explained that this was an official international competition held by the association, and the winner would receive a cash prize and an artifact as a reward. Suddenly, someone from the crowd shouted that it was not interesting. Emmy asked if it was time to stop explaining, but it was time for an advertisement since she was using headphones today. The protagonist's friends immediately rushed to his side. Hanajima ran up first and excitedly said that the guy needed treatment, but suddenly they heard a voice behind them. Yusung immediately raised his head. They saw the members of the Seven, who were ordering everyone to get out of the way with displeasure. The guys turned around, tensed up greatly, and Hanajima hid behind the protagonist's back. Between the two representatives of the Seven was Yusung's sister. The protagonist stared at her. She handed him a ticket to participate in the competition. After that, she said with a warm smile on her face that a lot had changed while they hadn't seen each other. Yusung looked at his sister without answering. The girl suddenly shifted her gaze. She looked at the frightened Hanajima and said that the guy seemed to have made a lot of friends. Suddenly, madness appeared in her glowing eyes. She lived through her brother with her eyes and asked if he had really changed. The protagonist felt like a little boy in front of his sister. He opened his mouth to say something, but suddenly, Hanajima pulled him out of his thoughts by pulling him. She held his uniform tightly. Pity and warmth were visible in her eyes. Yusung silently looked at his friend. After a short pause, he turned away. Taking the pass, he coldly replied that he would continue to change. He smiled warmly and added, "No matter what anyone did." Hearing this, the girl looked at her brother with glowing eyes. A few seconds later, she smiled warmly and said, "That's how." As she left, she waved her hand and said that she would cheer for him. After saying this, she and the 7 members left. After they disappeared, the protagonist was praised, saying that he had just entered and was already participating in the Inter-Academy Hunter competition. At this time, Yuna had a sarcastic smile on her face. Yuna asked maliciously if the guy would really participate in the competition with Adela. She asked if the girl really thought that she would be able to win this time alone. She continued to look at Adela and added that she could go with her. Adela looked up and replied that she was enough on her own. With her head held high, she added that, unlike Yuna, she did not need to join useless groups because she was strong. Hanajima enthusiastically said that it was simply incredible. She was glad that the protagonist defeated Seohyun and destroyed the unique artifact of Laja because she was worried that he might get hurt. Siu asked sharply with a smile if Yusung had a partner. partner?" the guy asked puzzledly. Sue raised his hands and answered that up to 3 people can participate in the inter-academy competition. The guy added that overconfident guys sometimes participate alone, and if they have good scores for the competition, then they can get a unique artifact, because in addition, there will be a chance to participate in the national competition. Sue said that winning the national is the dream of every student, and Han won it when she was a freshman. Yusun looked ahead, thinking that it was expected of his sister. The guy looked at Hanajima with a smile, thinking about his partner. The girl stood embarrassedly and smiled. Later, they parted and said goodbye, saying that they would see each other later. The protagonist quickly walked forward alone. Someone immediately stopped in front of him and greeted him. Amy smiled and asked if the guy could spare her a minute. Yusung smiled in confusion, and suddenly the girl asked in shock if there were any students in Gaon who didn't know her. Amy immediately handed him the letter. With a smile on her face, she introduced herself, saying that she was from class of the girl quickly jumped to the side, adding that she was usually called the academy's top student. She raised her hand, saying that she was also a popular streamer. Amy bragged, saying that she had 100,000 viewers on her broadcasts and over 10 million views on each video, while Yusun listened to her with a forced smile, confused. The girl turned away, rubbing her nose, and said that she was not that popular yet. Amy turned around with a smile at the protagonist and asked if she could stream his competitions on her site. The girl came close to his ear and began to whisper something. Yusung suddenly opened his eyes wide in surprise. Some time passed. The protagonist, together with Hanajima, who was confusedly saying that they were here, were in the elevator. It slowly went up to the 77th floor. The center of the 7, the girl exclaimed joyfully. The guys were standing in front of the doors of the center of the 7. The servants greeted them with smiles on their faces. Inside his room, the protagonist looked out the window at the night city and said that it was very high here. Hanajima was in the bathroom and was surprised to hear that the water was immediately hot. Sitting on the bed, she realized that her room was huge. Seeing the washing machine, she happily exclaimed that it had a built-in dryer. At this time, the protagonist discovered a large supply of food in the refrigerator. Hanajima saw a giant TV in the wall. A few minutes later, water splashed out of the bathtub. The girl plunged into it and breathed a sigh of relief. Raising her head, she said that everything here was amazing. She remembered taking a bath with her brothers when she was a child and said that the bath she knew was something like this. When she came out of the bath, she happily said that she wanted to see everyone since the exams were already over. The girl imagined getting on a plane and meeting with the units, and also eating sweets. Suddenly, she pinched her cheek hard and asked if she was just dreaming. Then she noticed the bracelet. Hanajima remembered the protagonist placing his hands on her shoulders. Leaving the memories, she lowered her gaze and warmly said that all this was more like a dream than a dream, but it was reality. She also remembered Yusun holding out his hand to her and saying that he was really glad that she was his partner. Partner, the girl said sadly in her head, adding that the exams were over, so it was no longer her. But before she could finish speaking, her bracelet rang. Hanajima put it on and saw that it was her mother calling. A system screen opened in front of her, transmitting an image of her mother. She waved and asked how she was doing, adding that she had heard the news. Then she stepped away, and her younger siblings came into the frame, admiringly saying that Hanajima was a great girl. The girl scratched her head in confusion and said that she was just lucky. Her mother, with a warm smile on her face, asked if she was overexerting herself. Hanajima smiled widely and exclaimed that it was the opposite, she was having a lot of fun. Looking down, she quietly added that she was having such a good time that she wanted it to continue like this. With a bright blush on her cheeks, she said that she was really having fun. The girl's mother looked at her daughter lovingly. Suddenly, she said that something seemed to be bothering her. Hanajima blushed and exclaimed that it was not so. Her mother looked at her and asked if she knew. Then she left her at the airport. She closed her eyes and added because she was afraid for her. A smile appeared on Hanajima's face. Her mother raised her hand and said loudly that she was proud of her. Hearing this, the girl was very confused. After that, she quickly ended the conversation, saying that she was embarrassed by her. A few minutes later, she jumped onto the soft bed. Raising her hand above herself, she thought. Her hand was covering the bright lamp on the ceiling. Suddenly, she saw a brand on her hand. The girl remembered Isshin, whose eyes were filled with hatred and contempt. Leaving the memories, she was confused. Coming to her senses, she sat on the bed and shook her head. Hanajima lowered her head and said with love in her voice that her mother was proud of her. It was not much. She was always like this. When Hanajima was little, she was saddened by receiving an F rank. But her mother stroked her head and said that everything was fine, because the desire to help others was much more important than rank. At home, the girl would confuse salt with sugar, to which her relatives, except for her mother, reacted negatively. Lying on her mother's lap, Hanajima asked if she could become a hunter. Her mother silently stroked her daughter's head. Leaving her memories, the girl smiled warmly. Raising her hand to the switch, she thought that instead of regretting what she had not done, it was much better to regret failure. Having said this, she turned off the light. Darkness reigned in the room. Hanajima slowly closed her eyes. A few minutes later, the protagonist opened the door. "Hanajima," he asked in surprise, seeing a girl red with shame and embarrassment in front of him. Yusun was standing in front of the girl. Hanajima lowered her head and turned to the guy. She clutched her pajamas and said in her head that she wanted to ask him to take her into the team. She knew she had to say that she wanted to become his partner. She raised her hands and tried to say something. The protagonist waited with a warm smile on his face. This made Hanajima even more confused and embarrassed. Yusung also looked a little confused in response to the girl. Cold sweat poured down Hanajima's face while she tried to say the cherished words. But suddenly she realized that she couldn't. "Good luck," she suddenly exclaimed, spreading her arms. A few minutes later, she was already sitting on the bed in her room. She remembered with tears in her eyes how Yusung waved his hand and closed the door. That same night, the academy building. The protagonist walked down the hallway, and in front of him was a notice informing him that he was starting training. The next notice asked him to go to the arena. The guy walked forward without a drop of fear in his eyes. "Heian," he said to himself. His feet passed through the barrier of the arena. After that, he stopped and sank into memories. He remembered his sister. She was different from him from the moment she was born. Yusung remembered how when he was little, he looked at a beautiful flower. It was a yellow fluffy dandelion. But unexpectedly for him, the flower was crushed. Surprise and a little fear appeared in his eyes. He doesn't know what Heian is thinking. She crushed his flower. The protagonist also remembered how he watched his sister with his parents. She was always revered in the Shino family. Heian's strength was incredible from an early age. Yusung looked at his sister in surprise. Suddenly, the girl turned around with her burning eyes. Putting her hand to her face, she smiled maliciously. Yusung was always afraid of her. The boy saw his sister with a crazy smile and burning eyes, having enormous strength. Leaving the memories, he clenched his hand into a fist and thought that even now he hasn't changed at all. The protagonist looked down with sadness in his eyes. Such a meeting, he suddenly heard a familiar voice behind him. Yusung came to his senses and turned around. He saw Su Heian, who handed him a bottle of water and said that he thought he would be happy if he won, but judging by his face, it seemed like he wasn't. The protagonist happily took the bottle of water and thanked his former rival. Su Heian scratched his head and asked if he was just drinking from someone else's hands when the competition was just around the corner. Wiping his mouth, Yusung replied that it was because he didn't think that his interlocutor could hurt him. Su Heian took the bottle back and said that there was no need to trust anyone here because in Gaon, everyone was a rival. Suddenly, they heard a voice behind them calling Su Heian. It was a pretty girl who sheepishly said that they needed to talk about yesterday. Su Heian turned around and said that he would be right there. The protagonist silently looked at them. Suddenly, he smiled warmly. Then he said that Su Heian's words always differ from his actions. Hearing this, the guy was surprised and asked what he was talking about. Yusung turned his body and replied that he himself did not give up, but told others that trying was pointless. Looking at his interlocutor, he continued to say that he trusted people, but advised him not to do this. "What?" Suhyun asked discontentedly. After that, he asked what the protagonist wanted to achieve at all, adding that he won, but looked like a dead man. Yusung closed his eyes with a smile on his face. After a short pause, he raised his hand and firmly answered, "To become the strongest." Having received such an answer, Suhyun was very surprised and asked if he was serious, adding that in Gaon, the student council president Hanyu alone was worth something. "Exactly," the protagonist firmly said, adding that it was her he would bypass. Suhyun looked at his former opponent in surprise. "No, that's not it," Yusung said calmly. Looking at the raised hand, he said that he had to defeat her. Hearing this, Suhyun's face changed. After thinking for a bit, he wished the guy good luck. The protagonist lowered his hand and looked at his interlocutor. The former member of the Seven put his hand in his pocket and said that he would support him, but he would have to use his strongest trump card. Hearing this, the protagonist became embarrassed. Suhyun adjusted his glasses and added that he was embarrassed to say such a thing after losing, but the academy competitions were no joke. A smile appeared on Yusung's face. "Got it," he exclaimed with a blush on his cheeks. The guys began to leave, and the protagonist, looking after them, said to himself, "The strongest trump card he has." After a while, sleepy Hanajima opened the door to her room and asked who was there. Suddenly, she saw the protagonist in front of her. The girl was confused and did not know what to do. Unexpectedly for her, the guy put his hands on her shoulders. "Hanajima," he said. Hearing her name, the girl was startled and waved her hands. Yusung said with a very confident face, "She." "Yes," Hanajima cried out, embarrassed. "Will he help him?" the guy asked. "Yes," the girl cried out with even more embarrassment and excitement. "Thank you," the protagonist exclaimed, closing his eyes. Hanajima came to her senses and, lowering her head, asked what all this was about. The two of them stood in the corridor while she asked what happened. "Spirit Forest, Dungeon Rank 4, Danger Level, Medium." Hanajima raised her hand and firmly said that it was here. The protagonist grinned and said that Sue explained to them what they should focus on during the competition. Yes, the girl answered, adding that he said that they would conquer the dungeon grave of despair. She, with a blush on her cheeks, happily said that there were 14 types of undead monsters and a dangerous boss, Lich. Yusung stood up and said that was why they were training here. Then Hanajima asked if she should summon her undead, a ghoul or maybe a skeleton, adding that if she tried hard enough, she could summon 3 at once. The protagonist stopped and closed his eyes. After thinking for a moment, he replied that he thought so too. In the fog among the trees, he saw black silhouettes. They were undead with glowing eyes. Suddenly, the legs of a horse emerged from the fog. The horse was dead, and on it sat a rider, followed by a huge army. The knight looked at the boys and said that mortals had come to their own doom. Having said this, he swung his sword. Preparing to attack, he ordered his army to show their hatred and make the boys undead. The protagonist, without turning around, asked his friend if she needed anyone in particular to help her. Exactly, he suddenly said. The boy stared intently at the formidable rider on the horse. Without a drop of fear, he stepped towards him. His eyes were shining and he said with a smile that he would finish soon. Saying this, he charged. The rider waved his hand and ordered his army to stop the boy. The undead immediately charged. Many spears and swords rushed towards the protagonist. Yusung reacted and opened his eyes wide. He deftly dodged each attack, simultaneously destroying the undead. Breaking through to the rider, he said, because this time, a terrifyingly powerful cloud of energy appeared in his hand, and he finished that he did not need to conserve his strength like during the exams. Saying this, he extended his hand and directed all his power into the rider. Hanajima stood behind and looked at the boy all this time. The rider fell to his knees in front of Yusung. After that, the boy turned to the girl. Turning completely, he said that now it was her turn, adding that she must make a contract with the Dark Knight before he was reborn. Hanajima raised her hands and said in confusion that she was a level 4 Dark Knight. Yusung smiled and asked if she really thought it wouldn't work. The girl twirled her hands and quietly said that she had already told him that she had a mana leak. But suddenly, the protagonist said that this was why they were here. Hearing this, Hanajima was very surprised and asked what. Then the protagonist said that Iris, his teacher's friend, had encountered the same problem. Mana leakage is a phenomenon in which mana, which is in large quantities, is forced to flow through a narrow passage, changes its direction. In other words, Yusung said calmly, this means that Hanajima has so much mana that it begins to flow in the opposite direction. Listening to her friend, the girl held her hand. The guy remembered the teacher and added that Hanajima can do it, so she should not let fear consume her, instead, conquer it herself. The protagonist clenched his fist and said that the girl could do it. The guy added that the girl should not let her fear consume her. He extended his hand forward with a smile and asked her to trust her strength. Hanajima looked forward in surprise. She clenched her hand into a fist and asked to trust her strength. Yusung took a few steps forward and said that even if there was a mana leak or if he failed, it would be fine. The guy looked at the scared girl and told her to just keep fighting. Until you succeed, the protagonist added, while Hanajima walked closer to the Dark Knight. The girl looked up, saying until you succeed. She immediately placed her hand, covered in mana, on the knight. A strong stream of red mana suddenly emerged from the Dark Knight. Hanajima quickly looked forward, saying incomprehensible words. A seal appeared on her hand and it spoke of fate born from misfortune. A magic ball with magic appeared in front of the girl. The skeleton's body was slowly gathering, while the girl asked who the knight's misfortunes belonged to. The protagonist put his hand to his chest and looked ahead with a smile. The guy carefully watched Hanajima, who stretched her hand up. Menacingly, she said that no one would be able to free themselves from contact with the witch. With glowing eyes, the girl ordered to say a name and collect her fragments. You, she said, after which she returned to her previous state. Hanajima looked up, adding, Laplace. Bright rays suddenly began to emanate from the magic ball, blinding everything around. The girl carefully looked ahead. Suddenly, she was very surprised, opening her mouth wide. The girl looked down at her hand, tremblingly saying that she just now, when suddenly the guy interrupted her. With a wide smile on his face, Yusung shouted that she did it because he knew that she would succeed. What? Hanajima asked in shock. She asked him what the protagonist was talking about, confused. With her mouth wide open, she looked up at the Dark Knight in front of her. He looked at the girl and called her the Queen of the Dead. The Dark Knight fell to his knees and asked for a new name. They put her hand to her ear and said that she understood. After that, she told the head of the association that everything was ready. The head himself was standing at the door. He stroked his beard and said that it was time to enter. The door opened and he said sarcastically that it was time to meet their proud newcomers. The AMCO conference room. Amy also announced on her broadcast that the head of the association had arrived. She said with a smile on her face that the competition would start very soon, so it would be better to skip the boring speeches and look at the promising candidates. She said that she wanted to start with the strongest contender for victory, Adela from Gaon Academy. The surprising thing is that she is the only one participating in the competition alone. Next up is the Japanese team from Shooten Academy. The team captain is Seiji, the shooter is Sakura, and the swordsman is Isshin. They all have S-rank characteristics, which is a strong bid for victory. After biting into a chip, the streamer thoughtfully said that the Chinese team is next, but there is not much information about them. According to rumors, they are very strong, but this is their first official performance, so they can be called a dark horse. And finally, the last team came from the girl's device. It was the protagonist and Hanajima. There was no fear or doubt on the guy's face. At this time, Wonho was addressed. The girl with a smoking pipe in her hand said that his student was somehow very different from him. In front of her was an old man who asked if she was worried about Ryujin, to which she replied that this was impossible, because anyway, such competitions are just entertainment. The coals in her pipe were actively burning. However, she said, holding the other end of the pipe in her mouth, she said that she was curious about how he would use the martial god style with such a body. She was a rank 8 hunter girl, the sword goddess. At this time, a voice came from the speakers announcing that the MSO was about to begin, so all the students participating should gather in front of their designated portals. At the same time, in another place, they were looking at the participant list. The Japanese rank 6 hunter Shuichi was sitting on the sofa, saying that among the participants, there was someone who was going to go alone. Not far away, the Korean rank 6 hunter Himchin was sitting. He folded his arms and said that this was Adela, a famous newcomer in the academic city. Not far from them, the head of the Green Forest Guild, rank 7 hunter Rose, was sitting with her hands behind her head. She said that there were many talented people in the academy city, so it was good that 2 teams were participating. After saying this, she opened her eyes slightly. She looked at the main character's photo and said, "Besides, this newbie." At this time, the head of the association put his hand on his heart and said loudly for the participants to move forward to the unknown. The Japanese team led by Seiji held their hand on their hearts. "In the name of prosperity," the head said. The second Japanese team also held their hands on their hearts. The main character and Hanajima did the same. "Humanity," the old man said loudly. Adela also stood with her hand on her heart. The old man finished his words by shouting that he wished everyone good luck in the competition. Loud applause rang out. The voice from the speakers was heard again, announcing that each student must pass through the portal. Hanajima was very worried. Suddenly, the protagonist called her, and the girl turned around in surprise. Yusung said with a smile on his face that they needed to act according to the plan. Hanajima immediately frowned, pursing her lips. The two of them quickly headed into the portal. Isshin watched them closely, looking after them. The hosts announced that Yusung and Hanajima entered a dungeon called the Grave of Despair. The protagonist looked at the second-rank monsters, ghouls, and said that this was expected from the international competition. They looked at the huge number of monsters, saying that they were surprised from the very beginning. With a sly grin, the protagonist turned to Hanajima and asked if she was ready. The girl suddenly raised her hand with mana up. "Yes," she screamed, activating the fog of the dead. The ghouls opened their mouths wide, screaming loudly. Spreading their arms to the sides, they approached the guys. Yusung suddenly put his hand on the worried girl's shoulder. The guy said he would help her concentrate so she could do it for sure. The monster rushed towards them screaming, when suddenly the protagonist said to show them the results of special training, he added, when suddenly the Dark Knight grabbed the ghoul with his hand. He squeezed his hand with all his strength, holding the monster by the neck. The knight raised him up, calling out to the soldiers. He grabbed the sword and ordered them to protect the mistress, killing everything in their path. Amy screamed in shock, when suddenly the hosts started asking if this wasn't the Dark Knight. They thought he looked a little different. Amy looked at the knight and screamed loudly that she couldn't believe it. The host said that the boss would still be a rank 5, but was it normal for F ranks to participate in these competitions? The protagonist said with a smile that they should begin, when suddenly Hanajima pointed her finger forward, saying that it was there. The girl stretched her arms forward, begging the Dark Knight to be by her side. Yusung thought that there were 2 boss monsters in the Tomb of Despair, the High Necromancer, the Lich King, and the Grim Reaper. The guy said that they would pass the test if they defeated at least one. With a sly smile, Hanajima added that their goal was both of them. The guys suddenly ran in different directions, when suddenly the girl firmly thought that in order to justify Yusung's trust, she would do her best to win. A camera was filming the guys from above. Rose suddenly exclaimed happily. Himchin said that they prepared in advance. There was no one left in the arena. Seohyun watched from the stands, and the girl next to him asked who he thought would win. The guy adjusted his glasses and replied that he did not know, because most of the teams here had already competed in nationals, so it was worth keeping an eye on Yusung and Adela. After all, the winner would get the right to participate in nationals. Many people in the stands were rooting for Adela. Yuna was sitting next to Seohyun and saying that Adela would win, of course. Looking at the system screen, she asked the boy if he had forgotten who was number 1 in Gaon. the granddaughter of the legendary Italian hunter Aiden Hortensia, possessor of the rare ability, even among S-rank hunters, to control ice. In Italy, she took first place, defeating Leon and all the newcomers of the Bianca Academy. She is one of the 3 most outstanding first years in the world. Yuna added that Adela was different from them from birth. Her friend was sitting next to her and said that this was true, adding that only Yuna could defeat her. Yuna smirked and said that the girl would say the same. After that, she said without a hint of doubt in her voice that first place had already been decided. At that moment, a girl's legs were walking down the corridor. It was Adela. She was in the hall, and at the top of the stairs stood a monster. This is the ice sorceress Kella boss with the 4th level of danger. Seeing the girl, she smiled contentedly. Without moving, she asked how Adela dared to fearlessly invade her castle alone. At the same time, ice servants were aiming at her from all sides with bows. Adela did not express any emotions, only cold. Suddenly, the boss ordered to shoot at the girl. All her servants at that very second fired ice arrows, and an explosion was heard. Kella, with a sly smile on her face, told the girl to disappear. But suddenly surprise appeared on her face. She saw Adela's glowing eyes. The girl was safe and sound. Away, the sorceress shouted angrily. Adela stretched out her hand and said indifferently that she was tired of listening to this. A notification appeared, which said that the automatic translation inside the space was disabled. An ice ball appeared in front of the girl's hand. The next moment, she fired it at the boss and a bright flash lit up everything around. A few minutes later, Kella was standing with difficulty. Adela slowly rose to her side. Fear appeared on the sorceress's face. Adela extended her hand towards her. Her eyes, full of disdain, burned brightly. "There is nothing to see here," she said coldly. At that moment, a spear pierced the wolf. Its dead body flew to its enraged relatives. A weapon appeared in the girl's hands and she said, "Excellent." It was handsaw, her ability weapon creation. With a spear in her hand, she said, 100 in total. Finally, the guardian of the sacred land, she said quietly. The bright moon was swallowed by black clouds. Silence reigned around. A few minutes passed and the girl asked in surprise why it got dark and the boss did not appear. She opened the system screen and asked herself if the information was wrong. Suddenly, she missed a quick blow that hit her hand. Blood splattered on the ground. Hansel grabbed her injured arm and turned around. Behind her, she saw the Moonwolf, a level 4 danger boss. A guy suddenly approached her and ordered her to get out of the way. He walked towards the boss without a trace of fear in his eyes. The monster's eyes lit up and he prepared to attack. Suddenly, he growled furiously and swung his sword. The guy's eyes lit up. In an instant, he dealt countless blows to the wolf. After that, he carefully sheathed his sword. Shock appeared in Hansel's eyes. The wolf's head fell to the ground and the guy turned away and ordered her to go back. He walked past the girl and said discontentedly that she was just getting in the way. Hearing this, Hansel looked away in disappointment. At this time, Adela came out of the portal. She took first place by killing one level 4 boss in 3 minutes and 15 seconds. Seeing this, Shuichi put his hand to his chin and asked if she was done already. Himchin smiled happily and said that he knew Adela would be first, her strength is amazing. Then the Japanese team came out of the portal. Ryujin's team took second place, having killed one stage 4 boss in 4 minutes and 35 seconds. Seiji's team took third place. They killed one stage 4 boss in 5 minutes and 11 seconds. Isshin looked around. He was looking at the protagonist's portal and thinking about Hanajima. Yuna chuckled in the stands and said that it was as she said, but Suhan objected, saying that there were still 3 minutes. The girl spread her hand and asked who could defeat Adela. She was a real monster. Suddenly, a loud scream was heard, saying that this was a real surprise. Hearing this, Yuna was very surprised. Shock appeared in Suhan's eyes as well. Yusung and Hanajima cleared the stage. They killed 2 stage 4 bosses in 6 minutes and 10 seconds. Thanks to this, their team breaks into first place. Yuna looked at this in shock and said that she couldn't believe it. Suhyun adjusted his glasses and asked if they really killed 2 bosses in 6 minutes. The host shouted that the guys had set a new record, so for their first participation in the competition, they would receive 2 artifacts. The old man watched this and said that this was the disciple of the king of fist fighting. "Not bad," said the goddess of the sword. She smirked and said that now she understood why he called them here. "There is an approach to every boss," so said the protagonist's teacher. "No matter how strong the hunter is, if he does not have a strategy for fighting the boss, he will not be able to defeat him." While the old man said this, he was drawing with chalk on the table. Without looking up from his work, he said that he would tell the protagonist about the boss monster, the Grim Reaper, the collector of souls. Having said this, he finished drawing. Wanha drew a soul collector and said that if you don't know its features and don't use a certain strategy, it won't die even if you kill it over and over again. The protagonist met it. In front of him was a soul collector, a Grim Reaper with a level 4 danger. He looked at the protagonist and happily said that he would finally be able to collect more souls. Having said this, he threw his scythe at the guy. Yusung looked at his opponent with glowing eyes and remembered the teacher who said that in a fight with this monster, the body itself is not important, because no matter how many times he kills it, as long as there are souls, it will resurrect itself. He looked closely at what was happening to the soul collector. The most important thing is to get rid of the lantern that he is holding in his hand. After these thoughts, he abruptly rushed to attack. The soul collector immediately reacted. The protagonist deftly dodged the attack and said in his head that he would finish off the monster in one blow. Immediately after this thought, he kicked the boss with all his might. The soul collector wheezed discontentedly while recovering. Yusung held his lantern in his hand and said that the strategic part was over. His eyes sparkled and he said that it was enough. A unique artifact, the Grim Reaper's soul ball, appeared in his hand. It was a ball of pure mana created from the souls collected by the Grim Reaper over 100 years, and by breaking it, the protagonist could absorb the power from it. After reading the description of the artifact to the end, Yusung said with satisfaction that he had received a very useful thing. After that, he turned around and asked his partner to wait a little longer. At this time, Hanajima's face was worried. In front of her was the undead, the supreme necromancer, the Lich King, a boss of the 4th level of danger. With his arms outstretched, he emitted a terrifying aura. She looked at the girl. He asked if she was a necromancer, adding that in undead dungeons like this, necromancers had incredible power. But, he said, looking at Hanajima's army. After a short pause, he summoned a giant skull golem of the 4th danger level and said that they were the same class, so there was no difference. Looking at the girl's army, he said that it was time to find out which of them was stronger. There was fear and excitement in the girl's eyes. She clutched her clothes near her heart and said to herself that it was jumping like crazy, and there was no strength in her legs at all. With her legs shaking from fear, she said in her head that this was different from the previous exams, because this time she could really die. She wanted to escape from here, but magic power appeared in her hands. Stretching out her hand, the girl firmly said that she could do it. She screamed in her head that she could change too. The Lich put his hand to his chin and said that this familiar was not suitable for her. Hanajima said that she would kill him, until Yusung came. She summoned a powerful skeleton. The Lich looked at her with burning eyes. Suddenly, he shouted loudly that he would take it away at the cost of the girl's life, and then ordered the huge skeleton to attack. Hanajima did not lose her composure and shouted to the skeleton and the golem. Her skeleton immediately rushed to attack. It deftly dodged the attack of the huge skeleton. At this time, the Dark Knight cast a spell. He released a powerful wave of magic at the Lich's army. Without losing control, Hanajima shouted to the knight, "Now." The rider nodded and shouted to the army, ordering them to follow the order of the mistress. "Rage, soldiers," the Dark Knight shouted, after which powerful attacks of the undead fell on the opponents. Magic attacks perfectly hit the huge skeleton. Hanajima, with a tense face, said to herself that there was an effect. Narrowing her eyes, she thought that at this rate, little by little. But before she could finish speaking, the Lich grinned and asked if this was really her plan. The ring on his hand caught fire. "Send the knights to storm and support them with black magic?" he asked. The magic projectiles stopped in front of the huge skeleton. A simple but good strategy. His undead stopped dying. However, the boss said, the girl's undead army stopped. The warriors looked up in surprise. Huge eyes hung over them, and the Lich finished saying that Hanajima wasn't the only one who could do this. As soon as he finished speaking, a powerful magic wave hit the girl's army. Hanajima realized that she had to stop the boss. The Dark Knight stood in front of her and extended his hand. He created a shield that blocked the eye's attack. "It's useless to try," the Lich said. The ghouls in his ranks rose from the ground. The ring on his hand was burning brightly, and he said that death was already. He stretched out his hand and finished speaking next to her. The fierce battle was in full swing. Powerful magic projectiles were flying at the huge skeleton. Hanajima, with her arms outstretched, ordered her army to hold the line and fill the gaps in the front line. "Interesting," the boss said, watching the girl. Looking at the Dark Knight, he said that familiars become stronger as time goes by. He saw how his army was slowly dying, and said if such a thing was possible, that she was adapting to the battle. The aura of the skeleton Hanajima summoned was only getting stronger with each passing minute. Without taking his eyes off the opponent, the Lich said that her talent was truly frightening. However, raising his hand, he created a huge ball of terrifying magical energy above himself and said that she would die here. Seeing this, Hanajima shouted at the Dark Knight to strike before the boss used the skill. All the projectiles rushed towards the Lich. The boss easily dispelled each attack and said that it was useless because this insignificant magic attack would not stop him. Hanajima said to herself with a tense expression that the amount of mana even made her skin tingle, so she would not be able to stop him. Squinting, she thought that this was their chance to break through his weakened defense. She would be able to win if the boss used up all his mana now. Immediately after thinking these thoughts, she turned to the Dark Knight. He understood everything and rushed to attack. The knight waved his hand and directed his most powerful attack at the enemy. Seeing this, the lich said that it was a good try, but he put a huge skeleton on defense and said that the knight's attack would not be able to break through the skull golem's barrier. Hanajima's eyes lit up and she shouted to the skeleton, "Now!" The skeleton immediately took off. In the blink of an eye, it appeared in front of the lich. The boss was shocked when he saw the enemy. The skeleton used the martial god style, Black Moon. A huge power struck the boss. Everyone on the battlefield watched what was happening. As it went, the lich said with his head down that it was dangerous, then asked what kind of strange technique it was, adding that his body was dead. All attacks on him were useless. He also said that he would take away all the suffering. The girl looked at the enemy with a slight fear. Stretching out his hand with a ring, the monster said that he would absorb everything from them. Having said this, he used dark clouds of despair. The ring on his hand caught fire. This power rushed past all the undead. The girl jumped back and covered her face with her hands. Black flames suddenly engulfed all the undead. The Black Knight asked in shock if it was sucking them in. The boss's power was getting stronger, pulling the undead with it. The lich concentrated enormous power in his hands, using reverse summoning, adding that only a clot of high-purity mana remained. Having gathered all the mana in the ball, he opened the can and wished himself a pleasant appetite. A crunching sound was heard, and mana spilled in all directions. The next second, a growl was heard, and the boss's hand appeared from the darkness. His appearance had completely changed due to the metamorphosis. He looked at the girl and said that a weak necromancer was nothing more than food for a stronger one. After that, he said that he would start with the intruder. In an instant, he jumped up. Having closed the distance, he dealt a powerful blow to the knight, ordering him to disappear. Hanajima gritted her teeth and screamed, "Dark Knight." Her servant's sword began to crack under the onslaught of the powerful lich. Suddenly, it shattered into pieces, and the boss pierced the knight through and through. The rider staggered. The next second, he fell to the ground with a crash. Hanajima looked at the dead knight and said in her head that they all tried hard. There were eyes all over the lich's body. He looked at the necromancer and said that the knight was doomed, because this was the power of the artifact. He said with burning eyes that this was the end. "It's okay," the girl suddenly said loudly. She said without a drop of fear in her eyes that this was exactly the moment she was waiting for. Suddenly, a powerful explosion was heard. Hanajima closed her eyes. She heard the protagonist's voice, who said that the Lich King, who had changed his form, had weak resistance to physical damage. Hearing this, the girl opened her eyes. In front of her, she saw Yusung, who said that she was good. He stood in a stance and said that he would deal with the rest. The Lich looked at the guy in surprise and asked him if he was attacking. The protagonist prepared for the attack and said that for a martial arts master, the undead Lich was an unpleasant opponent. At that very moment, he kicked him hard. But if we are talking about fighting with force, then it is a completely different story. The core began to crack. Unable to withstand it, they flew into pieces, releasing enormous magical power. At the same time, a notification appeared, which said that the students of the Academy Yusun and Hanajima destroyed the Lich and the Grim Reaper. In the hand of the protagonist lay a unique artifact, the Ring of the Flame of the Deceased. It has the power to strengthen the undead. Seeing it, his partner happily congratulated the guy. Yusun looked down and thoughtfully said, "The Ring of the Flame of the Deceased." Looking at Hanajima, he said that he thought that it would suit her better. The girl was very confused and said that it was too much for her, but Yusun took her hand and said that he already had a ring. Putting it on her, he asked her to use this artifact. Hanajima looked at the ring and thanked her partner, saying that he put the ring on his ring finger. Suddenly, she blushed with embarrassment. She imagined their wedding. At this time, the arena was joyfully shouting that the first-time participants from Gaon had won. Adela looked at the list of places and said, "Could it be her?" "Lost?" she said with surprise in her eyes. The arena was filled with joyful cries, announcing that it was a victory because 2 newcomers killed 2 bosses and obtained 2 artifacts, thus surpassing everyone. A voice came from the speakers, announcing that the winner would receive 2 artifacts and a large prize. They would also be given a seating number for distribution in the national competition. The spectators looked at the screens in shock and said that the S-rank hunters lost to the F-rank. Sayan put his hand to his chin and said that it was true. The director raised his fist and joyfully shouted, "First place." The man folded his arms and said that another terrifying newcomer appeared in Gaon. Next to him stood Sona from the Diamond Guild. She said with a smirk on her face that he had no shortcomings in battle. The man was the director of Bayon, the hunter Jinchial. He looked at his comrade and asked if she meant that he could be compared to a veteran. The girl opened the system screen and answered definitely, adding that she was sure that he had not shown his best in this fight. Why not? The protagonist raised his hand and looked at the system screen. It worked, he said to himself. It was reported that he had received a unique artifact, the flame ring of the deceased, as well as the title of sewing to participate in the national competition. Yusung, with a slight smile on his face, said in his head that the ring of the deceased was an artifact that could be obtained on the 10th floor of the tower. In essence, it was the same as food consisting of mana. Then he remembered his teacher, who said that in order to awaken the martial god style and the black dragon hurricane, his current mana was not enough. In order for a hunter to become stronger, he must in any case ascend to the tower and obtain artifacts. Leaving the memories, the guy clenched his fist and thought that by absorbing it, he would become closer to new skills. At this time, there was a ring on the girl's finger. Ring, Hanajima said happily, looking at the artifact. Pressing her hand to her chest, she repeated, ring, when suddenly she heard a familiar voice behind her. Isshin folded his arms over his chest and asked with displeasure if the girl had really abandoned their team and fled to Korea. His eyes were full of hatred and contempt. Hanajima turned around and fell into a stupor. The guy approached her and asked if the traitor really remembered the name of her former teammate. The girl stepped back and quietly said that she had not abandoned them. But Isshin interrupted her, saying that he did not need excuses. They had no problems because of her disappearance. A ring flashed on the girl's hand. Looking intently at Hanajima, the guy said that she was just a burden. He clenched his fist and said that she would not succeed, neither in Japan nor in Korea. She was just a weak coward. Fear washed over Hanajima. Isshin leaned over her and put his finger to her forehead. What next? He asked indifferently. Tears came to the girl's eyes. The guy's eyes lit up, and he said that she had a talent for running away. Suddenly, a hand fell on his shoulder. The protagonist, with a displeased face, said that the greeting was over. His eyes lit up, and he firmly said that he thought it was time for the guy to go. Isshin turned around with a displeased face. His eyes suddenly lit up. Yusun's eyes were also lit up. But suddenly the doors opened and Seiji ran in, shouting to Sakura that he was here. They ran up to their comrade and the girl asked why Isshin ran away from them. Then they saw the protagonist. Seiji put his hand on Isshin's shoulder and greeted Yusung, saying that they were incredible because they defeated 2 bosses together. The protagonist smiled and said that it was all thanks to his partner's abilities. The guy clenched his hand into a fist and said that everything would be different at nationals. Seiji, with a smile on his face, said that he had been hiding his strength until now, like a ninja. Isshin threw his comrade's hand off his shoulder and said that they would definitely see each other at nationals. Then he said that their team, Yusung and Hanajima, looked at the opposing team. As he left, Isshin finished saying that he would personally crush them. When the Japanese team left, the protagonist asked his partner if they were really on the same team. The girl lowered her head and quietly answered yes, adding that she understood why he was so angry. She said with bitterness in her voice that it was because she did not say a word to them, and ran away like a coward. The protagonist listened to her silently. After a short pause, he turned to her. Hanajima raised her head. Leaning towards her, the guy said that he thought a little differently. The girl blushed and asked what. Yusung leaned even lower and said that she did not run away like a coward, she just did not want to give up. He took her hand and added that without her, he would not have been able to kill the 2 bosses. Therefore, he hoped that she would trust him. From these words, Hanajima blushed with embarrassment. The protagonist sent a message to his friend and asked if she really thought that they could lose. After that, he said that he thought that victory would be theirs. A notification appeared in front of the girl, which said that Yusung sent her an invitation to participate in the national competition. The guy smiled warmly and said that he would accept her choice as an answer. Some time passed. The protagonist was in an artificial space. The Reaper's soul ball, he said to himself. Looking at the artifact he received, he thought that although it contained powerful mana, in order to absorb it, he would have to overcome the temptation of evil souls, but he had to endure it. This was a kind of test. Thinking about this, the soul ball in his hand cracked. A notification appeared in front of him, informing him of a threat that souls were being released from the soul ball of the Grim Reaper. The aura changed. The souls rushed to attack. They quickly reached the guy's body and fought against it. The souls in which only malice remained penetrated into the very depths to take possession of his body. Then they began to whisper. The face of the soul collector appeared behind the protagonist. The guy's eyes lit up. He heard his name being called. The souls asked him if he had really changed. They absorbed the protagonist, reminding him of his inferiority, weakness, and torment. They evoke the emotions and memories that are funeral for a person, but it is useless to refute their words. With these thoughts, the protagonist closed his eyes. He realized that all of these voices were ultimately his. His body was enveloped in his own mana. A glow appeared on his hands, and he said that their doubts were his doubts. The terrifying aura of the Reaper began to change to a calmer and more peaceful one. Yusung knew that he had to accept this voice, like he accepted his weakness. He folded his hands, and yin and yang appeared between them. This is the true meaning of the test. The guy began to subjugate all the absorbed souls. After a few seconds, the terrifying energy of death disappeared, and the protagonist gained enormous strength. He clenched his hand into a fist and said, "Unbelievable." The amount of mana exceeded her expectations. Suddenly, he turned his gaze to the side. He looked into the darkness and asked if he was really going to watch like this. A male voice was heard from the darkness, apologizing and saying that he got carried away. A boy with pink hair came out to him and said that after the student council president, he was the first one to catch him so quickly. After that, he smiled and said that his name was Sunwoo and that he was the 6th member of the 7. Looking at him, the protagonist asked if he really had any business with him. The guy thought about it and said that he would get to the point. He asked if Yusung wanted to join the student council. After that, he said that maybe the guy didn't know yet, but the student council was the most elite group in Gaon. Sunwoo extended his hand and added that the fact that Yusung won the inter-academy competition gave him the right to join, and besides, the president herself invited him. Extending his hand, he asked if it was true that the protagonist had no reason to refuse. Without a second thought, Yusung replied that he refused. "What?" Sunwoo asked in surprise. He spread his arms and repeated that the president personally invited him, so it was better not to go against it. The protagonist walked past and indifferently said that he knew this better than anyone. Stopping, he added that he could not accept the invitation. As he was leaving, he said that she was the one he had to defeat. A few minutes later, he was walking down the street. He looked up when he saw the sakura petals. The guy was looking at the blossoming branches of the sakura. The beautiful pink petals quickly said goodbye to the branches. The protagonist smiled warmly. Suddenly, Hanajima appeared next to him. Seeing her, the guy asked if she had been waiting for him, to which she exclaimed, "Yes," adding that they were now going in the same direction, to the 7 dorm. She lowered her eyes and said that it was cherry blossom season. She looked away embarrassedly and said that it only blooms for 2 weeks a year. Looking at her, Yusung asked if she was sad about that. "No," the girl exclaimed, without turning to the guy and saying that these 2 weeks her flowers were the most beautiful. She lowered her head, gathering her strength. Suddenly she turned around sharply and addressed the main character. A notification appeared in front of Yusung, informing him that a first-year student from Class F, Hanajima, had joined the team. The girl bowed deeply and shouted, asking him to take care of her this time too. She closed her eyes, waiting for Yusung's answer. But when she opened her eyes, she saw him in front of her. The boy with a warm smile on his face asked her to take care of him too. They looked at each other without saying anything. Suddenly, a loud shout was heard from the side. Turning around, the guys saw Sue and Renew walking towards them. When they approached, they asked what the guys were going to do on the weekend, to which Hanajima replied that she was going home to Japan, after which she asked Renia if she was from Australia. "Yes," the girl answered, adding that her parents were too busy. After that, they all looked at the protagonist and asked, "And he?" "Family?" the guy asked in surprise. Raising his hand to his chin and thought for a moment, he said that his family. After a short pause, he finished speaking, "Also extremely busy people." At this time, the director was standing in front of the system screen, on which there were 2 images of students. He was choosing between the main character and Adela. Raising his hand to his chin, he said to himself that if you look at the skills, you can choose anyone, but you need to pay attention to who will represent Korea better. A grin appeared on his face. "Okay," he said, "that's it." At this time in the shopping center, Yuna, along with the guards, collected a lot of clothes. Suddenly, she received a notification from the director. It was a joint mission with the main character, which consisted of patrolling the city subway. Seeing this, the girl grinned. "Interesting," she said later. That's how this video ends. If you have sat through to the end, please don't forget to press the subscribe button and leave feedback. See you in the next video.